Chairman, you may proceed.
Thank you. I would like to call to order this virtual special meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission on Friday, January 29th, 2021 at 1 p.m. Will the secretary please call the roll? Lee, you might be muted.
Good. Mr. Bryan? Mr. Bryan?
I'm here.
Mr. Covington?
Can you hear me, Lee?
Yeah, I can hear you, Michael.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Covington? I'll come back. Mr. Kaufman?
Here.
Ms. Lucier?
Here.
Ms. Matcha?
Ms. Matcha is not on.
Not on. Mr. Patterson?
Here.
Mr. Strange?
Here.
Myself and Mr. Trunzo.
Here. Thank you.
I'm coming back to Mr. Covington.
Here.
Okay, I've got everyone, Jeff, but Ms. Matcha.
Okay, thank you very much. So the meeting has a quorum. The meeting is now in order at 1:05 p.m. with a quorum of members present. So, Ms. Womack, would you please do verification of the meeting notice?
It was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on January 21st, 2021, and was sent out from the portal on the same day. Public notice for public hearing of site plan review application number 0620-03-Clear Space for the property located at 415 Rehoboth Avenue was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on December 28th, 2020. Notice was published in Cape Gazette on January 5th and January 8th, 2021. Coast Pressed on January 6th, 2021, and Delaware State News on December 31st, 2020, and January 1st, 2021. Notification specific to this project was mailed out to property owners within 200 feet, and signage was posted on the property. Public notice for public hearing of site plan review application number 0620-03-Rehoboth Spotlight for the property located at 417 Rehoboth Avenue was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on December 28, 2020. Notice was published in Cape Gazette on January 5th and January 8th, 2021. Coast Press on January 6th, 2021, and Delaware State News on December 31st, 2020, and January 1st, 2021. Notification specific to this project was mailed out to property owners within 200 feet, and signage was posted on the property. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Womack. The next item on the agenda is correspondence relating to the agenda items only. As most folks know, in the City Document Center, there is a link to all correspondence. There is a lot of it, and we were unable to embed each individual thing in the agenda this time. It was just an impossibility. So we appreciate everyone's indulgence with that. The link is open, and I think that's all I have to say about correspondence. Anything else I should say, Ms. Ann? No. Okay.
I
good.
believe that covers it.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I have introductory remarks. As everyone knows, the purpose of this special meeting is to conduct 2 site plan reviews. First, I want to say thanks to everyone for participating today. The pandemic situation is still difficult. Several of us are here, masked and socially distanced in City Hall. But for the most part, everyone is working on getting vaccines for their friends and family. And I hope everyone continues to take all the precautions necessary with the evolution of things like variants, which we don't know how they're going to affect the future. So please continue to be careful. And, please also be patient with each other. It is difficult to conduct these kind of meetings online. So the goal today is to have an orderly public hearing. And by covering what I want to say here, it's my intention to make that is to have a hearing that creates the best record possible. And hopefully nobody's feelings gets hurt. I hope everybody can make their points without getting too personal. So first of all, the city recording secretary reminds me, please do not talk over each other. So it's very difficult for the meeting minutes and any records that need to be created. So, please wave your hand. There's a lot of people on screen. We are paying attention, but it may take extra effort to get our attention. So we will do our very best. We will be finishing today by 4:30 p.m. That's our deadline. And I want to assure everybody that everybody will be heard. And we'll talk about public comments in a little bit. So just a very brief history of how we got here after the remand from the Board of Commissioners. The Planning Commission officers assessed the record and discussed and concurred with the Planning Commission on December 11, 2020, that the record was sufficient to schedule the public hearings, which we did. I will note that I was the vice chair during the July and August preliminary and site plan reviews. And I agreed with the chair that the record was sufficient to schedule those hearings. So I just want to go on the record that I agree with that position. So public notice was posted on December 28, 2020 by the recording secretary. During the December 11th meeting, regular planning commission meeting that I referenced, information was shared that clear space and the appellants were talking to resolve their differences. At that time, mediation was mentioned and was encouraged. The planning commission was to review any conditions that might come out of the mediation in terms of what our regular responsibilities are. At the January 8th, 2021 Planning Commission virtual regular meeting, more information was revealed about the mediation progress. Very short reports were given to the PC chair that talks continued and faith in the mediator is strong and neither party is planning to withdraw from the mediation. So I was kept informed about the progress, not about the content. So the record for today's public hearing is open. It's open right now to receive public comments. So the July and August preliminary and public hearings, the record is incorporated into the recording for these hearings. Just so you know, if you've seen it, a notice has been posted for a continuation of these public hearings on next Friday, February 5th. This is a logistical planning decision to allow time for the PC to take in all the information presented today and to deliberate and decide with refreshed mind. And based on the number of speakers we have and the content covered today, I do expect that we will follow this model. The site plan review is required because of the clause in section 236-30A, specifically part 3, an increase in intensity of use, which certainly applies to this situation. And also 5, any other site plan referred to the PC by the building inspector. Those The general purpose of the site plan review is covered in 236-30D, parts 1 through 5. And the PC will consider the factors in section 236-30E, factors 1 through 21. I want everyone to remember that the PC is in listening mode today. We are listening to what's going on. Everyone has conducted their own review. No one has reached a conclusion, and the PC members will be listening carefully for new information from the public, which may be considered for its deliberation of the 21 factors under section 236. The public hearing is not cross-examination of the Planning Commission members by the public. We will not be responding to questions raised today, nor will we be engaging in dialogue. I will, of course, allow questions from the Planning Commission to the applicants, consultants, and the public to clarify information for the record for our deliberation. I ask the very same consideration for the city staff. This is not their performance review or review of competency. Our city staff is qualified and trained and competent and under the supervision of the city manager. This project came to the PC as a fully code compliant plan, which fits the criteria for site plan review under section 236-30. It is not a concept review. It is not a preliminary review. We have no reasons to question the validity of the building inspector's conclusion that these proposals are fully code compliant. We will hear about we will hear about any PC member possible conflicts or recusals when I conclude these remarks. So the order of business today, here's how we're going to proceed. First, we're going to hear from the applicant. Then we're going to hear from the building inspector, and the chief of police is also here. And then at that point, we will have a PC discussion and questions. When the PC is satisfied and the comment and discussion is completed, we will proceed to public comments. I hope to have a little bit of time left at the end of the meeting for a quick PC discussion of the process of preparation for deliberation at the next meeting, where we'll concentrate on that. Now, some words about public comments. As the agenda says, 3 minutes is allowed. I pass the word to key folks that if extra time is needed, extra time will be granted, and I heard from a number of folks. The extra time today will be a total of 5 minutes. So instead of 3, you will have 5 minutes to speak if you requested extra time. If more time is needed after 5 minutes, it will be at the discretion of the chair about how to handle that. I may move on to the next speaker, but allow additional time later after all speakers have had their first 3 minutes. Or if we're close to a conclusion, I may let the speaker finish and go a little bit. The PC secretary, Lee Weber, will be helping with the time. And I want everyone to remember, the staff has to, we have to find you on this checkerboard on our screen. We have to turn your sound on. There's a lot of logistics. So, please be patient with us and be patient with you as well. So the speaker list, so several folks have asked for the speaker list. And someone suggested that I read the speaker list into the record now, which I'm more than happy to do, and I appreciate these kinds of suggestions. So I'm going to read through the list. I have to admit that I okayed extra time for everybody, but I didn't record it, so I think I remember it all. But I'm going to read through the list of names, and I'll say extra time. If you hear your name and I did not get your extra time, if you would let me know now, it would be super. So here's the list. Number 1, Cindy Lovett. Number 2, Richard Perry. Number 3, Wynn Achenbaum, who has extra time. Number 4, Suzanne Good. Number 5, Jan Conacy. Number 6, Harvey Schulman, who has extra time. Number 7, Ron Bowman. Number 8, Chad Sensenay. Number 9, Dr. Carr Everbach, who has extra time. Number 10, John Swift. Number 11, Edward Shanowski. Number 12, Bo Lauder. Number 13, Julie Davis, who has extra time. Number 14, Mark Kehoe. Number 15, Jennifer Duncan. And number 16, Mark Bechtel. So don't panic if I didn't say you have extra time. Just remind me when your time comes in, and you will get it. My memory is not perfect, of course. Okay. Okay. So I'm getting closer to the end. A little bit more. So the applicant is not time limited in their remarks. The chair will offer the applicant an opportunity to respond to questions or statements by the public, likely at the conclusion after everyone has spoken, but possibly I will ask earlier if I believe that it would be efficient to have the response earlier. Clear Space Theater et al., please take careful notes about all the questions that you want to respond to today. And of course, everyone still has the written record, which will remain open until next Friday. I ask that repetitive information be shortened as best you can to statements affirming what's already in the record. So, and please, while you have 3 minutes, if you don't need it, there's no need to take up the whole 3 minutes. We do want to be respectful of the staff here and get this process concluded today by 4:30. PC members will be taking their own notes of the new information presented during the public comments for our deliberation. Given the continuation of the hearing to February 5th, the record will remain open for written submissions until next Friday. However, I strongly recommend that new written comments be submitted by Tuesday, February 2nd. Please do the best you can. The last day or two before the planning committee is filled with logistical things, and content is very difficult to read last minute. And with that, I will conclude, and I will ask if the city solicitor and planning commission members, any questions, matters to address about remarks, any clarification, anything anyone wants to add? No. Okay. Do we talk about the recusal at this point? Or do I continue?
I think you continue at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, so now it's time to officially open the public hearing. That's at 1:22 p.m. So, the purpose of the special meeting is for the public hearing for site plan review application for Clear Space Theater and the public hearing for site plan review Rehoboth Spotlight. We are going to consolidate these reviews. So what that means is that we're going to ask the applicants and the city staff to speak to all issues for both proposals. We will have the PC will have our discussion of both proposals. We will go to public comments and we will ask for the same thing. So everyone should speak to both proposals. And at the end of that period, we will close the public meeting. So we do have two separate proposals, but the record can be consolidated for all the testimony today. At that point, I think we are ready to go to Clear Space and begin. So Clear Space, would that be Mr. Paulson?
Yes, I was going to start out and then introduce somebody else to also present.
Wonderful.
If you can open the microphone for Laura Mason, she will follow up right after I talk and is considered part of our applicant time. I'd like to thank the Planning Commission for again making time to hear our site plan review and look forward to another open and frank discussion of our site plan application. We have a steering committee of board members and volunteers who have been monitoring our progress on the entire project. And over the last week or so, we have been focused on a response for the Planning Commission based on the 21 points that are followed when doing a site plan review. Dr. Laura Mason, who is our board vice chair, our new board vice chair, has been on the board for 4 years and is familiar with the project. Dr. Mason took the lead on gathering information and preparing the report with the assistance of me, Donna West, our board chair, and John Pitchford, our board secretary. Donna and John will not be speaking today. I'm going to go ahead in the interest of time and brevity and invite Laura Mason to go ahead, Dr. Mason, to go ahead and pick up the discussion and review the 21 points and the information that we have discovered.
Thank you, Wesley. Good afternoon, and thank you to the Planning Commission for this time to review the highlights of our application. Let's move, we're not going to go over all 21 today. In August of 2020, ClearSpace Theater Company met the legal requirements to obtain the permits for the Spotlight building, lot number 141, and the ClearSpace Theater, lots number 137 and 139. During the August 14th meeting, the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission voted 7-2 to approve these applications. According to minutes from that meeting, the following reasons for approval were provided by the commissioners. The site plan is fully compliant with code. It meets the spirit of the CDP, and that arts and culture are very important to the community. Specifically, in the executive summary of the CDP, in the very first sentence, it reads that cities and regions that thrive in the 21st century will be identified by their lively neighborhoods and business districts, cultural and recreational attractions. It will be good. It will be a good addition and will work with the city. And finally, based upon a full and complete record, which has been more than sufficient time to be considered, and based upon that, it is in full compliance with the existing CDP and the city's zoning and building codes. In the same hearing, the city solicitor noted that the public hearings for both applications were properly noticed and properly posted, and documentation was provided well in advance. He was satisfied that there's no legal flaw with conducting the public hearings on the date of August 14th, 2020. Mr. Paulson submitted a document to the commission this week recapping the 21 points for site plan review. Like I said, in the interest of time, I will not be going over all 21 points. I just want to touch on the key issues as they have come up over the past years. The first point in the 21 I would like to cover is lighting, probably the easiest. Lighting was approved in the original building plans by the building inspector. Through discussions with the neighbors, there was concern about lighting on the north side of the building. The lights on the north side of the building are for emergency exit purpose only. Doors on the north side of the building are for emergencies only and will be alarmed accordingly. ClearSpace has agreed to use minimum lighting required by city and state codes in the back of the building to limit neighbors' exposure to light. Where permitted, lighting density will be distributed over multiple fixtures to shine the lower level light on a broader area. And that would wrap up our lighting discussion. I'd like to focus the remainder of the discussion on two sections combined: impact on nearby neighbors, and the final item, comments received. Since August, ClearSpace has been actively working on the topics of noise and parking that emerged in these sessions. With regards to noise, ClearSpace has been working with acoustic experts, Threshold Acoustics, to determine additional steps that can be taken to mitigate noise. Through these discussions, ClearSpace has agreed to additional soundproofing on the roof in the form of an additional layer of gypsum and a layer of green glue, which we're told will help mitigate the sounds in and out of the building. And we will increase the soundproofing on the rear exit of the rear emergency exit doors. The exit doors will be alarmed and only used once again in the case of emergency. The acoustic report can be found on file. In addition to these recommendations, ClearSpace has agreed to the following: moving the HVAC unit on the roof of the Spotlight building forward to the south side, adding a water feature to create white noise on the patio between the buildings, adding an 8-foot fence or what is allowed by city code along the back side of the property, abutting neighboring properties to the north, planting 16 trees as a buffer between the rear of the buildings and the north property line, adding a fence in the area between the buildings, also known as our patio, to discourage wandering to the rear or north side of the property. The rear of the properties will not be used for anything else other than emergency exits. While discussing noise, the topic of business hours emerged. ClearSpace has normal business hours of 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., with a few shows throughout the year that run past 10 p.m. This is not consistent with other business in the commercial district. For example, Rigby's, located in the same block, offers entertainment and operates until 1 a.m. Dogfish Head, roughly a block away, has a stage that books, quote, rock bands and operates after 11. I believe they operate until 1 a.m. also, pre-COVID. Conch Island, roughly 2.5 blocks away, has rock bands and they operate to 1 a.m. Other locations further from us in town, such as the Blue Moon and Purple Parrot, offer music or entertainment and operate past 10 p.m. Asking ClearSpace to limit operating hours would be inconsistent with other businesses in the commercial district. And that concludes our noise discussion. Now we get to move on to our favorite topic, parking. I want to address the issue of classes or educational activities first. In the past months, the topic of ClearSpace offering classes and therefore needs dedicated parking spaces per code has come up a number of times. However, per city code section 270-4, definition for educational facilities are defined as centers for higher education, elementary schools, secondary schools. Obviously, we do not fall into any of these categories. We do offer opportunities for enrichment similar to other businesses in the city. Quote, classes are offered at the following: Dimitri Yoga at 43 Rehoboth Avenue, Soulfire Yoga at 176 Rehoboth Avenue. Heart Wish Healing Center at 301 Rehoboth Avenue offers not only yoga classes, but they advertise workshops, lectures, and other events. The Body Shop Fitness Center on 70 Rehoboth Avenue offers fitness classes. Cape Penelope Senior Citizen Center at 11 Christian Street. None of these businesses have dedicated parking for patrons, and by requiring ClearSpace to provide dedicated parking would be holding ClearSpace to a higher standard than other businesses in the commercial district. So before going on to the actual parking space discussion, let's take a look at the numbers. ClearSpace is already a thriving business in the city and has patrons coming into town for shows with visits to restaurants and shops. The current theater has 92 seats, and the proposed theater would have 256. We use a formula that the theater averages 60% attendance, and based on patron surveys, 70% of those patrons drive. The current theater would need 40 parking spaces. That would be 2 people per car. Obviously, maybe a few less because we know sometimes people drive more than 2. Using the same formula, the proposed theater would need 54 spaces. That is just 14 more cars than ClearSpace currently brings into the city. What about a full house? We hear that a lot. The current theater holds 192 patrons, which would equate to 68 spaces using the formula I mentioned. The proposed theater would equal out to 91 spaces needed on a full house night. This is just an additional 22 cars to what we bring today. In 2019, ClearSpace sold out 30 shows. Once again, you're looking at the new theater will bring between 14 and 20 new vehicles into the city. To accommodate the 91 spaces of a sold-out show, there are 145 metered spaces from 4th Street to the Circle on Rehoboth Avenue, 75 metered spaces in the Rehoboth Beach Convention Center parking lot, for a total of 220 metered spaces in the vicinity. And this does not include additional side streets such as Lake. To help relieve traffic in the city, ClearSpace is committed to the following. Staff, actors, and volunteers are encouraged to use alternative transportation when coming to the theater. ClearSpace will provide a map of available parking. The map will highlight available metered parking on the Rehoboth Avenue and in the Convention Center parking lot. Please see Appendix A at the back of our packet. We have a mock-up of the text of our website that's dedicated to transportation in this parking map. ClearSpace will promote alternative forms of transportation to the theater through our website, ticket emails, and word of mouth. These forms of transportation include, but are not limited to, the Dart Bus, Jolly Trolley, Water Taxi, and Ubers. ClearSpace plans to offer an incentive program for proof of arriving by alternative transportation. This may be in the form of a gift shop credit or credit towards a future show. To reduce traffic, there's no plan to have simultaneously shows in the Spotlight and theater buildings. In addition, ClearSpace engaged the traffic group to complete a traffic valuation report in August of 2020. The report summarizes the traffic in Rehoboth Beach, particularly in the area of the proposed buildings. Highlights of the report include, in 2019, the average traffic per day was 26,454 cars. Assuming a sold-out performance of 91 vehicles is only 0.03% of all the traffic. The report states that conversations with Chief Banks and DelDOT Chief of Traffic Engineering indicated the traffic flow through the roundabout works well. The report provides a summary of traffic data. 3 years of crash data shows 31 crashes in the 31-mile section of roadway. 11 were crashes involving a single vehicle. There were no pedestrian crashes. 3 crashes involved motorcycles and 2 involved pedal cycles. The report concludes with the statement, the relocation of ClearSpace Theater Company to 415 through 417 Rehoboth Avenue will not, in our opinion, present any detrimental nor undesirable transportation or related impacts to the city of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Let me reiterate, the proposed theater will possibly only bring an additional 21 cars on sold-out nights and 14 cars on an average night. ClearSpace has been working with the community and city committee members to address problems to the best of our ability as they are identified. We will continue to address concerns as they are brought to our attention and at the appropriate time in the development and construction phase. In closing, ClearSpace strives to add value to the city of Rehoboth Beach through the live theater at the beach. The Planning Commission in August of 2020 agreed that ClearSpace will be a good addition and will work with the city, and is in full compliance with the existing CBT and city zoning and building codes. In section 9.3 of the City of Rehoboth Beach 2010 CDP states, today's consumers require diversity, entertainment, and relaxation. ClearSpace Theater meets this demand by providing year-round diverse entertainment to residents and visitors to the area. The 2010 CDP plan also states in section 8.3, a downtown that only has restaurants, clothing stores, and gift shops is not a downtown. And I'll repeat that again. A downtown area that only has restaurants, clothing stores, and gift shops is not a downtown. And that was in section 8.3 of the CDP. By affirming the 7-2 approval vote of the ClearSpace Theater, the Spotlight building, you will be helping Rehoboth Beach downtown continue to thrive. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Mason. Mr. Paulson, do you have anything to add to that, or is anyone else from ClearSpace going to speak?
I would, this is Wesley again. I'd like to thank Laura for her comments and share the following example of a reference that she made to the development and design process. One of the examples I have is we have worked very closely with the owner of the property to the west, which the Weath store occupies. There's a very nice fence along our property line. The owner was quite concerned about the future of his fence. And after a time, we were able to demonstrate to him that we could not decide that question about the status of his fence right now, that would have to wait until the time that the contractor is on site with a timeline. And only then would we be able to answer his question. Would the fence need to be moved, removed? Could it be replaced in kind, if, let me say that differently. Could the same fence just be reinstalled, or would we need to replace the fence for him? I think some of the issues that have been raised about noise and traffic fit into that category, and that we are committed to deal with them at the appropriate time in the development of the site, and that the concerns of our neighbors have been heard. So I would like to, again, thank Dr. Mason for her comments, and paraphrase her comment that a downtown that is restaurants, t-shirt shops, is not a downtown at all. And we look forward to being a vibrant part of downtown Rehoboth for the years to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. And that's everybody from ClearSpace, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so much. Next, I'd like to move on to the city building inspector. And Mr. Janis, do you have anything to add at this point from the, of course, the July and August records are already part of this record?
The only comment I'd like to make is probably that former chief building official, Demalier Molina, has deemed these buildings to be buildable, and we are moving as such.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's go to Chief Banks now. Can you join us, Chief Banks?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Wonderful. So again, your report, some which has been highlighted by ClearSpace Theater from August is part of the record, but I think if you'd like to supplement or highlight or respond to anything you heard, we would be happy to hear more or any new information since August that you'd like to provide. And take all the time you need, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't have a lot of additional information. I did give the traffic accident report back in August, and we had 16 crashes right around the circle. Since then, we did have 2 additional crashes, and but again, no bicyclists or pedestrians were involved. And again, it was 2 vehicles going probably faster than they should be around the circle coming in because they sideswiped each other and all. So no physical injuries or anything like that. So unless somebody has some questions particular, I think the record showed last time, but like any of these events that we have in town, we're constantly monitoring the situation. And if there's any concerns with traffic or safety, we do reach out to that business and take care of it and handle it.
Wonderful. Thank you for your report. So at this point, I'd like to engage the Planning Commission. So we've heard from the applicant, and we've heard from the building inspector and police chief. And I'd like to open it for anyone to ask a question, clarification, follow-up of these individuals. If I don't see your hand, wave it forward. Mr. Weber.
One question I have is with respect to the drop-off in front of the theater. We've talked about this in the past. On the plan, it shows, I think, 3 parking spaces and some areas that are striped for emergency vehicle access. I just want to understand exactly how that area would work prior to showtime. It sounds like maybe ClearSpace will be providing an employee out at the street to help direct traffic, but will that area, that, call it the parking lane, will that be open and accessible for people to pull in and drop off and continue on? I don't know whether that's a question for ClearSpace or the police chief.
I think we should hear from ClearSpace first if they're available to address that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. Our plan calls for asking for those front spaces to be designated as short-term parking in the evening hours. I don't have an exact time. We start shows at 7 or 7:30, and those would be short-term parking for people to come in, drop off, and excuse themselves to go park their cars. And they would be monitored by an usher to assist people. I don't know that they'd be directing traffic per se, but certainly assisting people to move along quickly as they drop off people. Is that helpful?
Yes, if I said directing traffic, that's not what I meant. I meant, exactly what you said, just someone there to.
Yes.
To help an elderly person out of a car and then maybe tell the driver to move on.
Yes. We have also talked about, related to that, doing one or two, like a restaurant does a cold opening to test things out, and also work closely with Chief Banks and his officers to monitor the situation and react appropriately to any changes that we need to make as we move in.
This may fall under that if, for example, if there's a car comes to showtime and there's a car parked right in the middle parking space and the person's nowhere to be found. Will the parking be no parking prior to that, so that there's certainty that drive lane is open for that purpose?
Our thought right now, without consulting further about the true definition of no parking, was to begin a period of short-term parking of like 15-minute standing period and enough time prior to a performance to allow that to hopefully be cleared out, so that is not an issue that you cite.
Okay, but it's one of those issues that can be dealt
Yes.
with as you as you kind of feel your way through this.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Weber, if I could add some comments, this is again Chief Banks. You have spoke with Wesley, and I have seen some plans and along with the fire company to have a fire lane. I think it's going to take up 3 spaces in front of the buildings, and then the additional spaces for short-term parking is what was asked by Clear Space. I did reach out to Sharon Lynn, the city manager, and she was willing to work with the business of Clear Space and to help out with that. Again, if somebody's in a fire lane parked for extended periods of time, it would start out like any other thing in town place. We'd give them a citation, or we'd tow it out of there. But people could quickly, pull in and gives a designated area, pull off and to get off the roadway, unload, and move on. So I don't see it as a problem, but as mentioned, as we do around town for any other events like that, church or the school or whatever, when things are coming on, starting up or ending, we make sure we have an officer in the area just monitoring the situation.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually rather see those 3 spaces as no parking, because I know how often someone is running into town for an errand, they see a 15-minute parking spot, they jump in there, they run to a store, and then on the way back, they run into a friend on the sidewalk, and 15 minutes becomes 40 minutes, and there's a car parked, and the show's starting, and it kind of mucks everything up.
I understand, and I definitely don't want to speak for the mayor and commissioners, but it's been my understanding in the past they've tried to work with the businesses to assist them with that, perhaps.
I know they will, so thanks.
Thanks all of you. Mr. Strange?
Yes, my question is, I think to the chief, it may be to Wesley, the comment was made with regard to the fire lanes. The current thinking is that the fire lanes are truly dedicated fire lanes and not assumed to be used intermittently in any way, shape, or form for cars to drop off. Is that correct on my part?
I think I can answer that too. That is correct. And there's additional space. There's 3 parking spaces that were going to be designated, is my understanding, for fire lane. And then there's a couple extra, 3 spots could be for parking. And so, yeah, somebody may yield to the right-hand side and go through the fire lane until they get one of those spots and stop. But correct, they would not be allowed to stop in front of the fire hydrant or in the fire lane. So Again, it's just to help get off to the shoulders, not to impede traffic.
Okay.
Thank you. How about other questions? Mr. Patterson?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I have 3 or 4 questions, but the first one is on this very thing of the drop-off spaces. So maybe it's a good time to jump in. It's a question to Clear Space, and I'll state the question and then beg your indulgence while I explain my thinking, which is a little bit different than what we've just been talking about. So my question is, how does the applicant react to a possible condition that there shall not be a drop-off space or any drop-off spaces designated at the front of the building? And let me explain. So I understand the design intent is that drivers should use those designated spaces to drop off passengers before they go to find a parking space. And then after a show, they'll drive from their parking space back to the location and pick up their passengers. So you've provided a traffic evaluation report that estimates the number of vehicles, but it doesn't give any estimate for the number of vehicle trips. And driving directly to and from a parking space is 2 trips for every vehicle. But it's 4 trips for each vehicle that drives first to a drop-off space, and then to a parking space, then back to the site after the show, and then away. And my concern with that is threefold. First, unnecessarily adding 4 vehicle trips to this particular stretch of Rehoboth Avenue strikes me as contrary to the goals of alleviating what is already a bottleneck right before the circle on the westbound side, especially in the evenings on summer weekends, which is precisely the time when people will be coming for the shows. And if it's not an ADA requirement, and I don't believe it is, although I certainly understand the convenience, and especially for mobility impaired people, if it's not necessary and aggravates an existing bottleneck, it strikes me as undesirable. The second thing is traffic coming eastbound on Rehoboth Avenue has to perform a U-turn to get to your site. And that U-turn location has no signal. And in the evenings on weekends in the summer, they'll have to be turning into precisely this block that gets backed up heading into the circle in the evenings as everybody's leaving the boardwalk and the beach at the end of the day. So that strikes me as a real risk of cars waiting to U-turn, backing up, and blocking the eastbound traffic. So that's a separate issue. And then the third concern is, since there's only 3 spaces, you could have a condition where people approaching to drop off find all 3 spaces are occupied, and just like it happens at the post office when all their spaces on Rehoboth Avenue are full, some people won't drive on by. They'll just stop and start unloading in the traffic lane, and you'll have created a situation that not only adds volume to this bottleneck, but also has reduced the usable lanes by half. So can I please have your reactions to eliminating the designated drop-off spaces?
I recognize your concern, and my first reaction is to say that we would need to study that a bit further and not dismiss it out of hand. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. It kind of falls under that idea of working a bit with the chief and our staff as we get ready to open the facility. I would say if it comes to us in advance of that, then I guess we can work within it, but I'd like the opportunity to test, to see what happens. I think Laura just texted me. She had something else she wanted to add.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head what the handicap parking situation is at that end of town. Chief Banks, you may be able to help me on that. But thinking when you drop off, you're normally dropping off somebody who has mobility issues. So maybe a solution is we have additional handicap parking spaces at that end of town That's it. That's just my
Okay,
suggestion.
thank you very much. So then my second area of question is it's about parking, and I think I heard Dr. Mason say it was her favorite topic, and pedestrians. So the question, and then I'll explain. The question is, how do you react to a possible condition of approval that would require the applicant to secure by contract some certain number of parking spaces from the private commercial parking lots that exist around Rehoboth Avenue and State Road and 5th Street and 4th Street. To explain, this is the area that your traffic report identifies as basically ideal for parking. It would, by securing that private parking spaces by contract and enable your patrons to use those sidewalks on Rehoboth Avenue and the marked crosswalks, and to stay out of the neighborhoods where there are no sidewalks, no crosswalks, no traffic signals, et cetera. These could be short-term contracts just for the summer, just for weekend nights, and the point is simply at the beginning of a season to have secured a certain number of private spaces for the patrons to use. So may I please have your reaction to that?
That is an idea that we've talked about extensively. One of our board members has asked numerous businesses around the area, particularly offices that typically do not have customers in the evening, if we could do such a contract. It was not well received by the businesses today. We have to remember, we're not building today. Performances will not begin on Rehoboth Avenue in the summer of 2021. We're looking at a year and a half, 2 years out. How can a business give us a contract for parking 2 years out when they're not sure they'll even be there? So while I understand the idea, and I think it's a good one, and we will continue to investigate it as we draw closer to opening, I'm not sure it's fair to say that a permit would be conditional on that when we can't control who will come and go in the area. Does that answer your question?
I think it does, yep. And then I guess a related question is, that you mentioned working with the chief and having your own ushers to deal with the situation out front of the building. How do you react to a condition that would require the applicant at its cost to provide police to ensure that people aren't stopping to drop off and impeding the traffic flow, and for the protection of pedestrians to avoid conflicts? Similar to what I think the special events, the races and things have to occasionally pay for support. Any reaction to that as a condition?
This is Wesley. I think we would do that as needed. I don't find that to be an unfavorable condition or something that we would want to dismiss out of hand. And I think it falls into that category of committing to work with Chief Banks to find whatever necessary resources are needed to facilitate traffic in the area as we open and monitor things. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so then,
Laura?
If I can go ahead and add to Wesley, I think that would be a seasonal thing. Obviously, in January and February, I'm not sure we would need someone to direct traffic, or maybe some of our smaller shows that are more readings where our audience is more around 100 than a 200. So I would ask that it be a consideration that that is not a mandatory for every event, but based on the season.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah, I concur with Laura.
Thank you so much. So my last thing is, it's about, you may have seen the public comment, including from a Delaware licensed architect, with questions about your gross floor area calculations. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to address that, maybe with some structure. As I understand, the thrust of the questions arise from a code requirement that when gross floor area for zoning purposes is calculated, stories or any portion thereof with a ceiling height greater than 12 feet shall be included twice in the computation. And I understand this is a material issue for the project, and that the design intent is to get that gross floor area for the clear space project under 15,000 square feet, the threshold for an on-site parking requirement under the code. And so my question is, can you point us to where you have demonstrated in the plan that the gross floor area calculations are correct, including for these areas that are mentioned, I think, in the comments? The second floor balcony seating, first floor areas identified on the drawings as the lobby, the crossover area labeled IT on drawing A401 on the west side of the first floor behind the house. And for those areas, I don't see any vertical dimensions at all to demonstrate that the ceiling height is 12 feet or less. And then also on the first floor, your drawing A402 identifies a loading area and back of the house with vertical dimensions that are taller than 12 feet. So can you point us to where it is shown that these properly calculated in the first floor area calculation?
First, I would rely on the work of Don Molina, the city building inspector, who verified our numbers and attested to the fact that we were under 15,000 square feet. That followed quite a bit of discussion and an email chain between our architect and the former inspector, where we went back and did put in lowered ceilings to keep us within the intent of FAR and have 12-foot ceilings. As an example, we were hoping to have the lobby with an exposed ceiling with the traditional ductwork and everything viewable, and we gave that up as a design feature in favor of keeping the 12-foot ceilings. I was a little concerned about the nature of the architect's study because it was submitted on behalf of, quote, a client, and the architect is not a resident of the city of Rehoboth Beach. So there is some question as to who a client is, and that matter will be dealt with separately. Notwithstanding that, our architect will be happy to go back and make whatever changes are necessary to find the remote areas that this architect managed to find that aren't within the 12-foot ceiling. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is all of my questions. Thank you.
I'd like to add a follow-on comment. That last discussion we just had, is that amenable to a condition, or are we good with that?
Well,
or is it a matter for the Board of Adjustment should something be?
I mean, I think that it seems to me you could have a condition to change the plan to, if the architect and the applicant identify the changes that would make, would eliminate these questions.
If
right?
necessary. Yeah.
Then it could be a condition, I suppose, and they would have a fair amount of time to make those changes.
Mr. Chairman, this is
yes.
Wesley. We certainly, time was an issue when we got this notice. In fact, I shared with that architect the correspondence that showed our efforts regarding the 12-foot ceiling issue. And we will go back, notwithstanding a condition. Obviously, it's necessary for our architect to go back and work on the few areas that are shown and have Mr. Janis look at the plans again to make sure that we've corrected whatever deficiencies have been pointed out. We wouldn't be building it as it's drawn right now. We will fix the problem.
Wonderful. Thank you for your cooperation in explaining that.
Is that helpful, Mr. Patterson?
Yes, that is very helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Jeff, this is Lee. I'm not familiar with this other architect that has rendered an opinion on this. What correspondence was that?
So let's see, there was a correspondence, just, it's one of the avalanche of public comment that came in over the last week. And
From who?
yeah, let me just see if I have the name here. Mark Redden. It's a letter dated January 27th, so it just came in 2 days ago. Should be in the document center.
I don't recall seeing that, and that's one of the problems with getting things 2 days before the hearing. I mean, on this particular issue, my feeling is that the applicant's architect calculated the floor area, Don Molina calculated it, and I'm sure Matt would be happy to calculate it as well. I don't know why we're getting a fourth opinion on this.
From an unknown client.
How many people do we need to have calculated before we're happy with it?
Okay, great. We have some other hands up. I think Mr. Bryan and then Mr. Strange.
Yes, Chief Banks, I just wanted to find out whether you do have in your department a program whereby you can assist for special events on an ongoing basis. That sounds like a fair request, but I wanted to make sure that you operationally have the ability to do that so that ClearSpace understands what it is they need to do and who's available to do it.
Yes, we do have a paid job opportunity for just topics just like this. As it was mentioned, we do foot races and a lot of other side events that we have that people feel they need to have extra officers at just for presence or to help out with traffic or whatever the case may be. So yes, it can be sustained. We just need advance notice and fill out a request, and all that can be worked with Wesley and ClearSpace.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Mr. Strange and then Mr. Kaufman.
Yes, Jeff, I just want a clarification of your original instructions that during this session, we're strictly going to be receiving information from the applicant and from the public, but not debating amongst ourselves with regard to any particular merits or any particular item. Is that correct?
I did say that, and that is correct. And I don't think I misspoke in terms of what we're doing here, but factual clarifications that we can get now in person, we should have. The debate about whether the answers will be later.
Yeah, I was concerned it just might be going further than that. I want to make sure I didn't misunderstand it. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Kaufman?
Yes, two things. Following up on Mr. Patterson, I'm wondering, this is a question for the chief and also for ClearSpace. Would a condition that requires the applicant to enter into a traffic mitigation agreement with the city that would cover any eventualities, such as those that were raised by Mr. Patterson, would that be acceptable? And then I had a second question of the chief, which is, given the concern of the nearby residents and parking on their streets, would the city or could the city be amenable to extending the requirement for permits after 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. at night during the summer months when there is a permit requirement, which would probably discourage people from parking on those streets, as if they didn't have a permit to do so, they would probably get a traffic ticket. So those are my two questions.
Chief Banks, are you able to speak to those issues?
Well, as far as the parking permits, I can only say that would be a decision made and voted on by the mayor and commissioner, so I would not be able to answer that at them. So it would have to be brought up to them to make a decision.
And
Mr.
as
Chairman?
Yeah, good. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, somebody said Mr. Chairman.
This was Wesley. I didn't mean to jump over.
No, go ahead.
Commissioner. The idea of some sort of localized zoned parking for those blocks of Sussex and Kent and Columbia has been offered up by ClearSpace to the appellants from time to time. And we certainly would be happy to lend whatever effort we can to support that kind of initiative. I as a expat of the DC area, I'm familiar with those kinds of restrictions in Montgomery County and the District of Columbia, and particularly around commercial areas and subway stations. So ClearSpace endorses that idea, and we would commit to work with the residents to lend our weight to helping that to happen legislatively, if that is something the appellants want to do. Thank you, Mr. Kaufman, for bringing it up.
Well, also the other point was that instead of specific conditions, as Mr. Patterson raised, if we had a condition that required ClearSpace to enter into an ongoing traffic mitigation agreement with the city to address issues of the type that Mr. Patterson brought up, once we have some experience on, what occurs, I think might cover all of those and be, an ongoing condition for cooperation. So I was just wondering if that would be amenable to ClearSpace.
This is Wesley again. Could you describe a little bit more about what a mitigation agreement might look like without getting into too much detail? I like the idea.
Well, that would be that without getting into the specifics, that would be an agreement that the city would enter into with ClearSpace that should these problems arise, such as with the fire lane or with the the short-term parking, that steps would be taken to address those so that those problems are removed. And it would be a continuing condition based upon the experience of operation.
So if I can react to that before anyone else speaks, I think we're talking broadly, testing various conditions that we may deliberate later. Traffic mitigation agreement may not be something that's even recognized here in the city. I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately. But the general concepts that we heard earlier from ClearSpace and from the chief, that an ongoing discussion about the parking spaces and the fire lane and the movement of vehicles, those are all things that we're looking for continued cooperation for should this project move ahead. They're not necessarily everything that can be nailed down precisely at this point in time. And I think we've heard that there's an abundance of cooperation amongst the parties. So I think our task when we deliberate next Friday is to wordsmith some of this into something that obligates everybody to something that we don't exactly know how it will end up.
Thank you.
Anyone can feel free to react to that
Mr. Chairman, this is Wesley again. I agree with what you're saying, and certainly we our ClearSpace is most interested in cooperating in that way, even though we're not defining mitigation now. I am reminded of my adversity to entertaining going to the Nissan Pavilion in McLean, Virginia, in the Washington area, because it has a reputation for horrible traffic. And part of our intent in building this new facility is to improve our visitor experience. And part of that is what happens when they cross over the canal bridge until they leave the canal bridge. And we certainly it's in our best interest to work with Chief Banks and the city to mitigate traffic issues. So you have that commitment from us.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Other planning commission members, other issues, other questions? Have we heard from everyone? Mr. Bryan?
Yes, for the building inspector, please. Matt, there's been a lot of discussion back and forth about the existence of offices, particularly in the Rehoboth Spotlight building. or not. If there are no offices in order for this project to move forward and be code compliant, and you determined 5 years from now that the building was full of offices, would that be a zoning violation, something that you could address?
I believe we would probably have some recourse to re-examine that, but I would definitely have to defer to the city solicitor in that case.
Okay.
I mean, if the use is essentially changed over time and it's not the permitted use, then yes, there are measures of enforcement that we can take to bring them back into a compliance mode.
I couldn't, you were stepped on. What'd you say, Glenn?
So there are measures under the zoning code that if the use essentially changes to something that was not approved over time, there are enforcement mechanisms that we can proceed with to bring them back into a conforming use.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, let me check one thing. Okay, so last call comments. I think we're done with the Planning Commission discussion. So we are ready to open the public comment section of the meeting. So again, I thank everybody for your patience. I will call the names off by one. Mr. Weber will be keeping the time. The time will either be 3 minutes or 5 minutes for folks who have requested additional time. If there are any questions about the order or you want to skip or anything, just let us know. We'll be as flexible as possible. And remember that the staff has to identify you and get you tuned up, so please be patient during this period of time.
Hey, Jeff, hey, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
would you like me to give a 30-second warning, or how do you want to do it?
I think we should give a 30-second warning, yes. I think the speakers will appreciate it, and it'll help me decide whether to let them conclude later or sort of wrap up where they're going. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. So the first speaker, Cindy Lovett.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Hi. Cindy Lovett, 4 Canal Street in Rehoboth. My house is right by the drawbridge down here. And 2 comments I really want to make. One is regarding parking. And that is that those of us at the west end of town down here have been spoiled all these years. We aren't accustomed to a lot of people in cars. We usually get a parking place in front of our house with no problem. But this has never been a luxury for those people who live at the easterly end of town. Now life is heading our way. And I don't understand how someone thinks it's okay to try to prevent people from parking in front of their house when all of the streets in Rehoboth are public. Clear Space will have one major traffic event each evening, which will be controlled by traffic enforcement. A hotel or other things that could go in there could have constant in and out. Tiny town is 1.8 square miles of land and about half square miles of water. It is fascinating, it is exciting, and it's growing. I know it isn't the same as it used to be, but find a town it is. The other comment I have is to the appellants regarding noise. If Clear Space doesn't go in that spot, something will. It could be a hotel with a pool or balconies. People will sit and chat early in the morning and late into the evening. There could be space enough for 2 large rentals, each with a pool, or a restaurant which has music every night, or many other options that could affect you far more than Clear Space will. So I say to you, the appellants, be careful what you wish for, you might get it. While downtown businesses, Rehoboth businesses are fighting all of the Route 1 competition, I think it would be a severe blow to allow Clear Space to move out of town, which may become their only option. I implore the Planning Commission to take into account the 230 residents who have signed a petition to support Clear Space. That's all my comments, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lovett. Next would be Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate being recognized. If it is okay with you, I would like to reserve my time for comments after the appellants have presented their side as well.
Wonderful. If I forget to get back to you, someone will remind me, but thank you for that. Okay, number 3, Wynn Achenbaum.
Yes, hi.
Hello.
I'm at 62 Columbia Avenue. Got 2 issues I'd like to speak to, and if there's time left over, a possible third. With regard to parking, 3 new items appeared in the correspondence folder in the past couple days. There was an offer by a resident owning land nearby on the circle of parking spaces in the evening. Turns out to be 5 spaces. That's a help, certainly. But over the course of 2 years, it's the only written offer I'm aware of, despite best efforts of ClearSpace to get the necessary commitments for the many more spaces. We need to correct something in the statement that CST made in its recap of requirements met. They said there are 145 metered spaces from 4th Street to the Circle and 75 in the Rehoboth Beach Convention Center parking lot, for a total of 220 spaces, metered spaces in the vicinity. This does not include additional side street metered parking. First, the Convention Center, in the block from 4th to 5th with the median parking, there are 36 spaces westbound, 42 eastbound. That's a total of 78. In the block from 5th to the Circle, where ClearSpace needs to build, there are spaces westbound and 15 eastbound, a total of 23. So that's 101, not 145. The data on that is in my letter to the Planning Commission entitled Site Plan Review Looks at the Big Picture. Third, I need to correct Mr. Kehoe's assertion that 40 to 50 new spaces can be added in the median. He suggests adding 40 to 50 parallel parking spaces in the grassy medium from 5th to the Circle. He said the last block of Rehoboth is the only block that does not have parking in the median. Estimates 40 to 50 spaces. My experience with that block is that on a typical summer afternoon or evening, adding those spaces in the median just won't work. The street is too narrow there. And you have the U-turn at 5th Street, and you have the Circle, and you have the crosswalk, and it would just be a mess. That block is short, having only 23 spaces right now. You might be able to add 30, but I hope.
30 seconds, please. 30 seconds.
Oh, Mr. Weber,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I do have.
We have 5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes. Okay, I'm sorry.
Mention extra time. I'm
Okay.
sorry, Ms. Ogden.
Go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay. I'll add that the restaurant's customers come and go. They might occupy their space for 60 to 90 minutes, depending on their waiting time on a busy night. But ClearSpace's customers, though, come and stay. They're in the theater from 7 or so for a 7:30 performance to 9:30 or 10. The parking spaces they occupy don't turn over. And if they come for dinner before the performance, those cars might be there from 5:30 to 10. Even the restaurants their patrons go to might end up being net losers. Second issue, the elevators. Mr. Paulson's recent list included fire equipment and other emergency access. Fire equipment has been approved by the state fire marshal. Details can be found in the drawings on file in site plan. The plans, even the tree plans, include the fire marshal notes. And I'll note 3 out of the 21 items. Full building and fire plan review is required. Building cannot be occupied or construction or renovation started until completion of building and fire plan review. And finally, most important, elevator cars to meet the interior dimensions set forth in the Delaware State Fire Prevention Code. I think that piece of the code has been in place since 2015, and it calls for all new passenger elevators shall be provided with a car size to accommodate an ambulance cot 24 by 84 inches in its horizontal open position. There's a note there that says the words "to accommodate" in this context is intended to mean the cot is in the horizontal position and shall travel into the elevator without having to modify the position. Once the cot is in place, there should be room for at least 2 EMS attendants. This is code. I think it's part of the International Building Code. back in 2018, at one of the sketch plan review meetings, the Rehoboth Beach's fire chief said that elevators must be able to accommodate an 80-inch stretcher. That's in the record. Turns out that 84 by 24 is the requirement. Nothing I found online suggests that the fire chief has been asked to look at the drawings, nor have I seen signs of a report from the state fire marshal, just those notes. And this pertains to both buildings.
30-second warning.
Okay, I think I've covered it. Oh,
Okay.
One other question.
Sure. Please, go ahead and finish, please.
Is the fire chief okay with where clear spaces refuse is being stored indoors? So I think that's worth making sure that fits.
Your last comment, Ms. Achenbach, it broke up. I did not hear it. Could you repeat it, please?
I'm concerned about storage refuse, both for Spotlight, and if I have another chance, I'll speak to that. But for the theater itself, the refuse storage is inside. And I don't know whether there are safety issues associated with that. Is that a normal thing to do? Just a question I hope you'll look at. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. Next, I have Suzanne Good. And Suzanne, do you need extra time? I don't recall whether we approved this before or not.
Good afternoon, Chairman Trunzo and all others present. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we hear you fine.
Excellent. I was delighted that Commissioner Patterson, who, as all of you I'm sure know, has some previous experience on the Planning Commission, brought up the issue of the problematic ingress-egress on a stretch of Rehoboth Avenue where traffic backs up regularly, especially beginning about 3:30 p.m., certainly Thursdays through Sundays in a regular season, and sometimes, as long as the weather is good. So that's yet another reason why on-site parking is so critical. The first citizen comment talked about how somehow a hotel would generate similar traffic problems. To me, that's just fallacious because hotels have very sporadic, spaced out parking ingress and egress. So it's just not, unfortunately, analogous. I'd also like to refute something Dr. Mason on behalf of ClearSpace stated. Well, the overall problem I have with it is that to claim that because it's not specifically a secondary school like Cape Henlopen High School, that somehow that exempts ClearSpace from defining their classrooms and their summer camps as educational. They are, in any sense of the word, educational. And one of the examples Dr. Mason cited, along with some yoga centers, which simply aren't large scale, she cited the Cape Henlopen Senior Center and implied that it has no on-site parking. Well, that's just patently false. It has a flat lot, which may or may not be used in the evenings by, I don't know, one of the Belmore across the street. That I'm not sure. But the Senior Center, I believe, is only open from something like Commissioner Byrne would know, maybe 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. So it's simply not reasonable to talk about how other educational venues don't have parking. It's just not true. I also was not surprised that you've seen my letter. Dr. Mason basically confirmed what I know from an economic point of view. None of these nearby lots want to enter into a long-term agreement because they need, let's say they want to sell their land, some sort of restrictive covenant of providing parking 60 or 110 nights a year. They'd have to buy their way out of that to make their land as valuable as they hope for it to be. So the fact that Dr. Mason has acknowledged they're struggling to get agreements apart from the 5 spaces in that gravel lot behind McGregor Homes, which apparently is owned by a couple who live on Norfolk Street. The parking problem has always been the crux of the matter, and there's no town I know of which would want to burden the nearby area and also pose competition for parking for restaurant and other business owners, where there's already a shortage of parking. As we know, Frog Pond and Nicola's have cited the dearth of parking as their main motivation to leave town. I also was, I was almost, I was very disappointed that ClearSpace is offering a parking map to its patrons. They've cited this in recent weeks. There are two problems. The communications department regularly, and I have had confirmed by Evan Miller that, again, they have contracted for this for the summer of 2021, a full parking guide for visitors, for anyone else. So all ClearSpace Theater is doing is reminding folks that if they want to be frugal, there is this free residential parking on Henlopen Avenue, on Columbia Avenue, on Sussex Street. They are purportedly saying they're going to tell their patrons to avoid those streets. Well, it's like telling them, oh, if you want to save $8 on parking, just it's like ringing the dinner bell for free parking. So that to me is one of the many reasons I think we need to go back to a reasonable discussion. I live close enough to the theater that I had to learn almost surreptitiously through the USDA hearing on March, I believe it was March 10th, 2020, of any of the details of the plan with no parking. And I implore you to go back to the drawing board. I think at this point, 56 parking spaces on site, off street, are now a bare minimum. Thank you very much. Suzanne Good, 1 Grove Street. Thank you, Chairman Trunzo.
Thank you, Ms. Good. Next, I have Jan Coniston.
This is 5 minutes.
Can you hear me? Yes, it's 5 minutes. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
5 minutes.
Can
Yeah,
you hear
Jan,
me?
We can hear you.
Oh,
We can
okay,
hear you,
sorry.
Jan. Go ahead.
All right. Before I start on my presentation, I just have to correct a point that Mrs. Mason made. When she quoted the CDP, I was an author of the 2010 CDP, so I really hate to see it misquoted. When she referred to what makes a vital downtown, the CDP said since the adoption of the 2004 CDP, Rehoboth has lost a pharmacy, a hardware store, and a dry cleaner. No reference to it. All these businesses are vital to a thriving downtown for full and part-time residents, and to some extent tourists. A downtown that has only restaurants, clothing stores, and gift shops is not a downtown. So she misquoted. A performing arts center is not a dry cleaner, a hardware store, etc. So what I wanted to talk about is there seems to be some thought that if you're against this location for ClearSpace, that you're against ClearSpace. Nothing could be further from the truth. Although ClearSpace is literally moving heaven and earth to locate in Rehoboth Beach, it actually serves all of Sussex County according to their own website, and also the makeup of their board, which only includes one person from the city. And it is an asset to the community, not just at that location. A couple of 100 feet from the traffic circle on small lots with no parking, literally in the back and the side yards of long-established residential neighborhood. ClearSpace, putting a theater there is like putting a square peg into a round hole. It simply doesn't work. There are multiple locations that come to mind, both in town and out of it, when I think of ClearSpace. I suspect ClearSpace would prefer to remain in town, as Sussex County zoning requirement for this type of theater complex are more stringent than ours are. One in-town location that comes immediately to mind is Baymart. In town, easily accessible to in and out on Route 1. There's already a light there, plenty of parking, and easily serviced by the Jolly Trolley for those who want to leave their cars and either walk or ride into town for dinner before a play. Parents can easily drop their kids off for classes, but ClearSpace seems fixated on a location where what they want is what they want. Then it simply won't work. ClearSpace is a destination attraction. People will attend its shows and classes wherever it's located. Building at this location, as I said, is like putting a square peg in a round hole. To make this peg fit, ClearSpace found it necessary to avoid the parking requirements. So offices were eliminated from the most recent set of plans. But it strains credulity to think that one can run a complex theater and performing arts education program with a full range of classes and summer camps, in addition to a full theater performance schedule with an office at home, as Mr. Paulson indicated that he can do. It's akin to a plant manager running a factory floor from his bedroom. The executive director needs to be on site, the staff needs to be there, the artistic directors. Like Virginia Woolf, the executive director of ClearSpace also needs a room of his own. It's called an office. There is an office in their current location. In the first set of plans that were turned in, there were 6 offices and a conference room. COVID is not here to stay. We will return to business as usual. I venture to say that staff won't be working from home when the theater was built, with classes running all day, productions underway, all of the administrative and artistic work that needs to be done to run an entertainment building and an arts training program, which is essentially what ClearSpace is. If you believe ClearSpace that they don't need offices, then the right thing to do is to require a covenant attached to the deed that forbids offices within the complex unless all provisions of the code are followed. Offices need to be defined and enforcement provisions included. If these buildings are built, they will be here long after we're gone. It's up to you as a PC to fulfill your responsibility to protect the character and the sense of place in Rehoboth and to ensure the buildings follow the code. And I'll talk about noise. To compare a theater and restaurants is like comparing apple to oranges. They are both managed in different sections of the code. Although another issue this particular location raised is noise. What happens with this in ClearSpace should stay within ClearSpace. The theaters must be built with the acoustical protections to keep whatever happens inside these buildings inside. The current plans for the acoustics in the theater are geared towards of 95 decibels. That will not work for larger bands or concerts or with groups who bring their own sound equipment. Noise absolutely must be kept within the building. It's not appropriate to entertain the neighborhood. Preventing that needs to be a top priority. Our noise ordinance says if it's audible on my property, it's too loud. Okay. All right. Well, I have more, but maybe I can come back.
Jan, if I can ask you a question, stay on for a moment. How much more do you have? Can you finish in about a minute, or do you need more time later? Jan?
Now,
okay.
Jeff?
No, I was asking you, do you need another minute or minute and a half to finish, or do you need more time later?
I just need another minute and a half.
Go ahead and finish now then, please.
Okay. If the complex is dark by 11, people returning to the cars, talking, slamming their doors, and starting up what will happen is a more reasonable hour. I've seen plans from ClearSpace that call for a cabaret and spotlight beginning at 10 p.m. That's unacceptable for several reasons, the main one being cabarets are banned in Rehoboth Beach. A cabaret is defined as an establishment where patrons are entertained by performers who dance, sing, play instruments, or perform other legal acts for entertainment, but not to include a dinner theater and where such entertainment may be performed during or after service of dinner. I won't go into the whole thing, except that a cabaret is banned, as is a cafe. And there are other things that are banned citywide. That was passed by a referendum back in the late 80s, early 90s. Rentals should be limited as the time of day, type of rental, number of rentals per year. And then I had a quick question for Mr. Kaufman. He mentioned several times over these past few months, he referred to a practice in the community where he formerly practiced. Their planning commission would hold the record open, ask for a public hearing, I believe he said 30 days, to allow time for people to comment on the testimony from the hearing. And I also imagine for the PC to take the time to deliberate on the same issues. In my experience on the PC, I can't recall a time when we had a public hearing on a complex project and made a decision the same day or even the same week. In fact, very complex projects, hearings continued for months on end. So I'm wondering if Mr. Kaufman can talk more about that, and perhaps it's something we can adopt. It's the responsibility of the PC to ensure that not only the code is applied, but the character, ambiance, scale, sense of place of Rehoboth is protected for us as future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conacy. Mr. Paulson, I'd like you to hold for this time until we get through every speaker, please. Okay, so next I have Harvey Schulman. Mr. Schulman asked for extra time, and you may also want to defer to later. Is that still the case?
Oh, yes, I think I would like to defer until after Mr. Perry speaks, since he's speaking apparently on behalf of or in support of the applicant, and I'd like to hear what he says before I respond. So yes, I'll defer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bowman.
Yes, hi, Mr. Chairman. I requested two speeches, one for the Clear Space and one for the Spotlight Theater. I'm happy to consolidate as you requested if I could have that extended time.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Ron Bowman and I live at 100 Sussex Street. Since the fall of 2018, I have attended every city meeting that announced Clear Space on the agenda. As a retired music teacher, I've always supported Clear Space's mission to provide arts to Southern Delaware. But this site plan review is not just about supporting the arts or a NIMBY issue as some would like to paint it. Actually, it's a Rehoboth Beach vision issue of growth, scale, adherence to code, and rights, which are residential rights. Decisions like this can actually change the landscape of our town forever. For 2 years, the neighbors on Sussex Street reached out to ClearSpace to work with them in hopes that they would consider making a few changes to their building plan. Those requests were denied, but I'm happy to say that that's not the case anymore. A few months ago, I met with several ClearSpace representatives and had a productive, collaborative meeting that proved to be beneficial to me and to ClearSpace. Just for the record, I am not an appellant and I did not represent their concerns. I was only speaking for myself. Among just some of the changes, they agreed to include moving the HVAC units 2 feet south on the roof of the Spotlight building and adding fences to the back of the property between the 2 theaters and also along the back of the property line between all of the 3 Sussex homes. For that, I'm truly grateful of the changes that they made, and there were many others as well, as Dr. Mason noted. At the August meeting, I expressed my concerns on parking and traffic, and I'm really glad to hear that that subject is being discussed today with this Planning Commission. Now I'd like to focus on a few more concerns relating to issues closer to my home. My first concern is related to noise. The new theater design places the theater, at this time, in the back of the lots closest to the residential homes, unlike the first design. There is no buffer. Simply stated, there is a theater, an exterior wall, and residential homes. And I'm very concerned about the amplified sound penetrating through the exterior wall. ClearSpace presented an acoustical sound study. Several owners on Sussex Street hired their own acoustical expert to evaluate their study, and that report is documented, which I encourage everyone to read. Based on that report, I have a few inexpensive recommendations. 1, upgrade the rear fire exit doors to the highest STC rating possible, and I believe ClearSpace has agreed to do this, which I'm thrilled to hear. 2, mount acoustically absorbing outdoor panels on the lower rear walls of both theaters to reduce reverberation noises. 3, test the acoustic transmission loss through the roof and the noises of the air handling units to verify they do not violate noise ordinances at the property line. 4, my next recommendation is a standard in the industry. It is a noise monitoring station where microphones can be placed inside the theater and outside at the property line. This device sends a red light signal to the sound technician if the volume exceeds the code. This device only costs $7,000, and it should be required to both monitor both theaters and to ensure that the noise ordinances is not being violated. Finally, I recommend, upon completion of construction, an independent acoustical study be performed to test both theaters at the 95 decibel volumes to prove it does not violate the noise ordinance. If it does, remediation will be required. These are reasonable, inexpensive requests that ClearSpace should be willing to do to satisfy the neighbor's sound concern. I hope this commission condition that each item be required. The second concern is lighting. It was addressed by Dr. Mason as well. I'm going to quickly go through it. The architect, Sue Haynes, told me personally that each light facing my home would be approximately 60 watts, which sounded great until I read the specs. listed on their lighting plan, which states that it has 3,785 lumens, which is equal to 280 watts of brightness per lights with 4 doors. I brought this concern to the attention of ClearSpace, and I was told that they'd be willing to change that light fixture. My request is for ClearSpace to honor that commitment and that the wattage of brightness for each light not to exceed 60 to 100 watts,
30 seconds.
which is approximately 1,000 lumens. Another concerns of noise and safety is that more doors on the main theater facing the avenue are needed. If we want to encourage 265 people to safely and quietly enter and exit into the main theater, why do we only have one set of doors facing Rehoboth Avenue and one set of doors facing the sidewalk terrace? For safety and noise, I recommend this commission to insist that more doors at the front of the main theater facing Avenue be added. And my last request is to simply to say no rooftop terraces or balconies, which is the same condition that the last planning commission required. My recommendations are not complaints. They are solutions to problems that will make ClearSpace a better theater and a better neighbor. And I want to thank you for your consideration.
Wonderful. Did you get everything in that you wanted to say?
Yes, if I were to make one passing comment, it's just a response to Dr. Mason, and I appreciate all that she has done and everything that she said. I know that one thing she said was ClearSpace does not plan to have simultaneous shows at ClearSpace and Spotlight Theater. The word plan is a little bit ambiguous to me, and it can be removed at any time. You know, a statement like that, I think, as important as it relates to parking and the numbers that she related to parking and the number of people going into the main theater, my point is they should just come out and say that they will not have simultaneous performances. And I think that would solve some of the parking concerns if both shows were going on in 2 different buildings. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Number 8, Mr. Sensenel.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. And thank you for your time, commissioners. Good afternoon. I'm Chad Sensenig. I live at 98 Sussex with my wife and my 2 small children. As a bordering property owner to ClearSpace, we are very concerned about the current approved ClearSpace site plans with only an approximate sound transition coefficient rating to the exterior walls. In my past testimony to the Planning Commission, I pointed out the word approximately is not quantifiable and is subjective and is open to interpretation. Our family and my surrounding neighbors are also concerned about the noise levels emitted from the theater, so we hired a highly experienced professional in the field of acoustics. He has an undergrad from Harvard and a master's and doctorate from Yale in engineering, and his cost has been a significant impact on our families. The report details his following, and I begin my quote. The Rehoboth Beach Noise Ordinance, Chapter 189, Noise specifies in Section 189-4 the maximum noise levels for a table under Part C. Maximum permissionable noise levels are to be measured at the property line, and further notes a 5 decibel difference between the limits of the commercial and residential districts, reported by Threshold in their acoustic report. Their report for the commercial table details in Section 189-4A1 ordinance states, when 2 or more zoning districts are involved, the maximum noise level for the restrictive zoning levels there shall apply. If a residential maximum permissible level is applicable here, then there's a 6 decibel margin between what they applied and what he applied. So really, there's only 1 decibel difference between meeting ordinance and not meeting ordinance. In other words, there's a thin safety margin between the predicted noise levels and a violation of noise ordinance nearly here, end quote. My concern as an engineer myself is that the acoustical consultant for ClearSpace did not take the time to fully assess the standards and requirements of Rehoboth Beach Code for which they're designed a theory to. I now ask, what else is being missed in the code from a perspective standpoint? ClearSpace's consultant used the least restrictive decibel numbers to the advantage of ClearSpace's to convey code compliance. I'll reiterate, Section 189-4A1 ordinance states, where 2 or more zoning districts are involved, the maximum noise level for the more restrictive zoning districts shall apply. ClearSpace's consultant totally missed this
3 seconds
in the report and used this to their advantage. From my research, I can also tell that the noise meters that measure things noise meters are plus or minus 2.5 decibels. So when you use these to measure the compliance, you have only a plus or minus 2.5 decibel meter for comparison. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Sensenay. Next, we have Dr. Carr Everbach, and Dr. Everbach has 5 minutes.
He is not on the call.
Oh. Mr. Sensenay, can you come back?
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Sensenay, is Dr. Everbach the acoustical expert?
No, sir, he's not on. We couldn't pinpoint a time for his availability, so he's not on today. Thank you, though, sir.
Do you think can he join us later, or is this just skip?
I can find out, but I would skip it for now, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I'll skip it. Find out and let us know if he can join. Thank you. Okay, number 10, John Swift.
Is this 5?
Are you able to hear me?
Is this 5 or 3 minutes?
Mr. Swift, do you need 5 minutes or 3 minutes?
I don't know. I don't think it's going to go 5, but I'd appreciate having that, especially
Okay.
since Fox is not going to be likely speaking.
Sure. We'll go with the 5 minutes then, and then whatever you need.
I don't think it'll take that long.
Okay, great.
My name's John Swift. I live at 100 Sussex Street. And I wanted to speak to the Planning Commission. In light of the fact that Ms. Mock improperly contacted our acoustic expert and used improper means to persuade him to give her a copy of his confidential report, which I paid for, and the fact that she's passed it along so that every Planning Commission member has that confidential report. Our expert will not be testifying today. Ms. Mocker put our legal strategy at risk and made it impossible for us to get a fair hearing today, especially if she participates. Not only me, but Mr. Schulman joined my request at the Planning Commission and have Ms. Mocker participate. So you might want to allow Mr. Schulman in on that. And then I wanted to bring in some comments that I have about the project. Back in 2006, just because this Planning Commission doesn't have all the history that when this project started over almost 30 months ago, that in 2006, the city downzoned Sussex Street from commercial to residential. The one thing that the city neglected to do was change the zoning of Rehoboth Avenue that backs up to Sussex Street when it's residential. It should have gone down from C1 to C3. This was not done, and the city got it wrong, which is now why a project that's too large for these lots is before you. It's not all ClearSpace's fault, but a lot of blame lies on both parties. The PC needs to get the conditions on this project correct so the city does not make another mistake like they did in 2006. The buildings, ClearSpace Theater and Rehoboth Spotlight Theater, are going to be built once, and they need to be done correctly the one time, because once it's built, it's going to be impossible to fix the noise problem coming from the building. The Planning Commission needs to place conditions that make sure the sound that is created inside ClearSpace Theater and Rehoboth Spotlight Theater does not leave the buildings. The report on January 16th, 2021 that Carr Everbach, our acoustic expert, produced, was sent to the PC, stated that ClearSpace Theater, Rehoboth Spotlight Theater will be within only 1 decibel, 95 decibels of violating the noise ordinance. That standard is set too low and does not address the low frequency like bass that can end up vibrating our property while you're sitting inside your home. These are the 5 different things that I feel that the Planning Commission should set as conditions and are very reasonable and not going to cost the ClearSpace Theater project that much money. 1, upgrade the rear fire door to the highest STC possible. It is the weak link and most likely any noise you will hear coming through it. 2, test the theater after completion of the rear wall construction using a sweep sinusoidal signal inside the hall of at least 95 decibels on the rear wall and measure the effective transmission loss outside the theater at the rear property line. Since transmission loss is independent of sound level, it should be possible to predict the interior noise level that would violate the noise ordinance. Add an extra layer of cement stucco to the concrete masonry block fascia on the rear wall if this test shows that the transmission loss is insufficient, i.e. noise ordinances are violated. 3, set up a noise monitoring station with an interior microphone mounted on the rear theater wall and one at the property line for both properties, both Clear Space Theater and Rehoboth Spotlight. Coincidence of the interior signal with the exterior signal, basically a time delay and an amplitude reduction, can be established with tone bursts, sinusoidal signals, and the testing of two above. Subsequently, simple signal processing can make the interior noise signal out of the exterior noise, and this data should be made available to the interested public through a web interface. 4, mount acoustically absorptive outdoor panels on the lower rear wall of the theater, on each side of the rear fire doors to reduce reverberation of theater noise, conversations, or any other noise present in the otherwise acoustically hard rear patio of the theater. 5, test both acoustic transmission loss through the roof and the noise of the air handling units mounted on the roof prior to occupancy. Verify the air handling units do not violate noise ordinances at the property line. Also, I wanted to address, earlier it was brought up their schedule, and I've seen different things online versus what was said today was that basically their hours are till 10 o'clock, and then another thing said till 11 o'clock. If the comedy and icons and other performances start at Rehoboth Spotlight Theater at 10 o'clock, they will not be over at 11. So those are things to please keep in mind and consider. I don't think these conditions are unreasonable for the PC to put on the building to impact. It's easier to fix the problem before it's built than after it's built. Thank you for your time and keeping these considerations and conditions on the applicant. So we've never been against them coming here, but just make sure that they're a good neighbor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swift. Next, we have Edward Shanowski.
Chairman, I'm just listening, no comment.
Okay, thank you. Number 12, Robert Lauder.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead, Mr. Lauder.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman and members, I thank you for allowing me to speak today. Here we are yet again discussing the appropriateness of Clear Space Theater and their new spin-off, Spotlight Theater, for the parcel they have acquired on Rehoboth Avenue. Why? Because Clear Space and its leadership continue to try pushing what amounts to a size 10 foot into a size 7 shoe. Its design, the questionable FAR, the comprehensiveness of its site plan, which leaves out its neighbors on the north side of the very same block, its lack of parking, and its aesthetic failings, and I could go on, all of which are clearly absent in their plan or are non-code compliant, should disqualify them from receiving your approval. In the face of all these inadequacies, the former PC persisted in spending time, city resources, and engaging in divisive politics in order to get approval for this project. I hope this newly constituted PC will not follow the same path and will accept that the proposed building just simply isn't acceptable on many fronts. As a contiguous property owner, I asked the PC to protect me and my neighbors from the intrusion of noise from the theater, to protect us from the loss of light and the shadows this behemoth building would cast on our backyards, homes, and gardens. I asked the PC to protect us from light intrusion from the theater. I asked for your protection from circling cars looking for parking on our already crowded neighborhood streets. Rather than aspirations, which carry no weight and were a spurious, on-the-spot invention of the previous PC to basically give CST carte blanche to do what they wish, I ask that this PC demand in writing its requirements to protect neighbors who have tried to work with Clear Space to protect our right to peaceful enjoyment of our homes. Please require in writing, if you approve this project, that as CST has already promised in previous meetings, there will be no use of the building roofs for anything except access to systems. That as CST has already promised in previous meetings, there will be no public food services in the building.
30 seconds.
That as CST has already promised, that they will build an 8-foot fence at the north side of its lot, currently not on the drawing, that runs the length of the property. That as CST has shown in its plans, there will be 16 or even more mature trees that span the length of the lot on the north side of the property, and that the trees and fence are placed in a way to maximize sound buffering and conditions so that the trees may flourish. We are the tree city after all. That is just promised by CST. They will work with the 2 sound engineers involved to make the theater as soundproof as modern building techniques will allow. Further, listening today to ClearSpace's testimony, there are still too many unresolved issues. I've heard too many quotes, "We will need to look at that" today to feel confident that this project can go forward in good order and not allow CST very substantial loopholes that will be near impossible to close after the facility is completed. Please assure us that your decision will be based on current code, the prevailing CDP, and respect for the neighborhood in its totality, not just the part that faces Rehoboth Avenue. That CST would compare their building to the quote, mid-century modern laundromat and the Ark, which at its building activated all sorts of codes to ensure that similar monoliths would not loom over our small town, says a lot about their aspirations for not only their building, but for our charming town. The neighbors are not trying to be obstructionists. We are truly frightened for our peace of mind and well-being, as most of us plan on retiring to our homes. Please help protect us. Thank you for your time and for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Lauder. Next, we have Julie Davis, who has extra time. Ms. Davis?
Good afternoon. Am I connected?
You are connected, Julie. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff. For the record, my name is Julie Davis. I reside at 527 North Boardwalk, and I'm both a city resident and a property owner. And I want to make something very clear from the outset. I am not here to, quote, kill ClearSpace. My husband and I have been patrons at a number of its productions in its venue on Baltimore Avenue. We've brought our children and our grandchildren to those productions, and our grandchildren have participated in some of the summer programs that ClearSpace has run. But I am here to discuss 2 critical site plan issues regarding the proposed ClearSpace project, its traffic and public safety impacts, and its lack of architectural compatibility with the city's commercial downtown area, as well as the surrounding neighborhood. The Commission's site plan approved application sheet states categorically, quote, the applicant has the burden of proof to justify that all requirements have been met to support approval of the application. Section 236-30E of the Site Plan Review Code states that the Commission shall consider 21 factors relating to the proposed project and shall also review the plan in light of the city's comprehensive development plan, city code, and other applicable laws and regulations. And under Delaware law, when the term shall is used, it's mandatory. Thus, the Commission must consider these 21 factors, including traffic, safety, and architectural compatibility issues. Moreover, as I'm sure each of you has been advised by your counsel, unless ClearSpace provides substantial evidence regarding these factors, the Commission will not have a sufficient record to support approval of the proposed site plan. Now for the traffic issues. As you already have heard, ClearSpace engaged the Traffic Group, or TTG, last summer to provide a traffic evaluation report. However, this report is not a traffic impact study that would meet the standards of DELDOT or the National Institute of Traffic Engineers. To the contrary, the TTG report is based on faulty methodologies as well as incomplete and inaccurate factual assumptions. To get to its conclusions, which I'll read in a minute, TTG relied on several on-site surveys that ClearSpace conducted from 2016 to 2019, asking its patrons how they traveled to several performances at its Baltimore Avenue location. These surveys indicated that 70% of the patrons arrived by car. Based on this limited and informal data, as well as unsubstantiated assumptions that every single car would have at least 2 patrons as passengers, TTG found that only 91 vehicles would be generated by a performance in the new main stage theater on Rehoboth Avenue. TTG then found that these 91 cars would not increase congestion on Rehoboth Avenue or the traffic circle because the cars would disperse gradually throughout the day and evening. This disbursement finding was based on the same out-of-date surveys, which asked patrons about activities in which they engaged before and after performances. Based solely on these surveys and its assumption that each car would have the 2 patrons as passengers, TTG concluded the clear space would increase the average traffic on Rehoboth Avenue, and this you heard earlier today, by only 0.3%, and therefore the relocation from Baltimore to Rehoboth Avenue, quote, will not, in TTG's opinion, present any detrimental or undesirable transportation-related impacts to the city. The fact is, however, that the proper measurement isn't the number of cars to be generated. We've also mentioned earlier by Commissioner Patterson, it's the number of vehicle trips that those cars will generate. Each car is going to come and go from the theater. That's not one, that is 2 vehicle trips by cars on Rehoboth Avenue in the vicinity of the traffic circle. The conclusion also totally ignores the fact that traffic will be generated by Rehoboth Spotlight. No, the Rehoboth Spotlight patrons and its traffic are not taken into account. It ignores the traffic to be generated by the dozens of actors, theaters, management staff, musicians, and other personnel required for the performances. It ignores the traffic that could be generated by Clear Space's theater education activities, and it ignores critical differences in traffic generation potential resulting from moving the theater from Baltimore Avenue to Rehoboth Avenue. When this additional traffic is considered, it is clear that the complex could generate more than 500 new vehicle trips during the day and evening, especially in the summer season. In addition, a proper traffic impact study that met the DelDOT and Institute of Traffic Engineers standards would have analyzed existing traffic and transportation conditions, trip generation rates, trip distribution assumptions, side trip assignments, peak hour factors, street capacity data, and safety mitigation strategies. However, the TTG report ignored all these considerations. In addition, the TTG
Ms. Davis, this is the chair. Are you getting to a point where you could wrap up in about another 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes, or do you want to come back a second time?
Let me finish traffic now, if I may, and I can do that within a minute or 2. And then I'd like to come back and talk about architectural compatibility either later today or next week or whenever the commission would hear me.
Okay, so let's finish traffic and then we'll come back to you today for architecture.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
In addition, the TTG report failed to analyze potential pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular safety issues that Clear Space will invariably create and that would have to be considered and resolved under DelDOT and Institute of Traffic Engineers standards. These considerations include whether nearby intersections and lanes operate safely now or will need to be changed as a result of the new development, whether existing left through and U-turn lanes in the vicinity of the site entrance and the nearby intersections are and will be adequate once the development is in place, whether traffic from the complex will block access to and through and turn lanes or cause upstream backups, and whether additional stop signs, stoplights, street striping, cross-sectioning, or physical reconfigurations should be implemented to ameliorate any unsafe conditions ClearSpace will create. As I previously stated, the Commission is mandated to consider the traffic and safety impacts of the proposed project, and the applicant has the burden of proof. It is beyond dispute that ClearSpace has not provided substantial evidence with respect to those factors sufficient to justify approval by the Commission. And I hate to sound so harsh, but as a traffic study, when all of these considerations are taken into account, the TTG report is simply not worth the paper it's written on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Davis. We'll come back to you after we get through the full list. Next, we have Mr. Mark Kehoe. Mr. Kehoe?
Yes, hello.
Hello, we
Very
can
good.
hear you.
Okay, great. Hi, I just wanted to give the perspective of someone who parks in the area kind of across from the clear space site on a regular basis. I don't live in town. I used to reside in town a long time ago. I know there's some comments that the opinions of those of us who live outside of the city limits shouldn't be taken into account, but just to point out that, about 30 to 40% of the town's revenue is come from parking, as you know. And so in the mid 90s to the mid 2000s, I had a group house at 212 Philadelphia Street right downtown. But since 2005, I've lived just outside the city limits at Spring Lake, across Route 1 from the Beach Walk proposed subdivision, which you all are quite familiar with. But I spend most of my time to the detriment of my expanding waistline in downtown Rehoboth's restaurants. And I'm a regular patron of Rigby's restaurant, which used to be called Partners Bistro, and it was Harlow's before that. It's located almost directly across the street from Rehoboth Avenue from Clear Space. And I generally do not have any trouble finding parking on that last block of Rehoboth Avenue from 5th Street to the Circle. So I think some of the neighborhood worries of parking are a little exaggerated, but I have two suggestions about some parking maybe solutions that I have not seen brought up before in the extensive public record on Clear Space. And one is that that the last block of Rehoboth Avenue is the from the Circle to 5th Street. It's the only block that doesn't have parking in the median. And just kind of a rough count, I was over there the other day, is that you could probably get anywhere from about 40 to maybe as many as 50 new spaces if you continued the median parking in that last block. If you consider how like the next block of Rehoboth Avenue from 5th Street to about 3rd and 4th Street, from the State Road intersection to Christian Street, does have median parking, and that seems to accommodate pretty well some of the parking needs for the large restaurants in those areas. For example, I think we know that Dogfish Head's 10,000 square foot restaurant, it seats, I looked this up, 245 patrons, plus there's another 35 on its patio. That's roughly the same, so 245 plus 35, it's about the same as Clear Space's new theater says it will seat. And Dogfish Head's companion restaurant next door, I believe they share the same liquor license, as I think Attorney Mandela's pointed out before, Chesapeake and Maine, that also seats another 100 people. But even despite when Dogfish was renovated, if you may remember, they used to have a parking lot adjacent to the original Dogfish building. They removed that parking lot. And even after removing that parking lot, despite all this extra seating and increased restaurant space, that block of Rehoboth Avenue seems to handle somewhat well the parking for patrons in that area. And I think it's because you've got all that additional parking in the median. So, I mean, I understand that this may require some working with DelDOT, and the issue may be outside the purview of the Planning Commission. It may be to the streets and commissions, or maybe the commissioners themselves and the mayors. But I think you've got some options here to expand some parking. And as you may know, each additional meter spot can generate a maximum of about $4,000 a season. So if you've got 50 spots, you could get up to $200,000 in total revenue for the year. Now that's assuming the spots are occupied all the time, but still there could be some additional revenue to pay for some of the costs of extending parking here. And then the second solution or idea I have is that I believe Wes Paulson brought this up, is that you could require permit parking to be extended till 10 p.m. or 8 p.m. in the residential areas near the Clear Space spot. When I lived on Philadelphia Street, parking was really hard to come by on that part of Philadelphia Street because we were right next to Christian Street where there are meters. And so to avoid the meters, people would kind of come onto the residential street where you didn't need a permit after 5 o'clock. And many of us in our group house, we're from downtown Washington, Arlington, or Philadelphia. We were used to permits on residential blocks near commercial areas until 8 or 10 o'clock. And we often wondered why, Rehoboth didn't extend those time permits a little later. And I think that, requiring permits, for later into the night on Sussex, Grove, Kent Streets, Columbia, and Hendelton until 10 o'clock would help address, neighborhood parking concerns. So that's it. I just wanted to kind of offer some ideas on someone who, parks in that area on a regular basis. I hope this is helpful, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe, and we're always happy to hear from stakeholders in Rehoboth Beach, no matter how close your residence. Thanks for participating. Next on my list is Jennifer Duncan, and I believe Ms. Duncan is not on and couldn't make it today. Am I correct that she's not on?
That's correct.
Okay, wonderful. And then the last person on the list is Mark Bechtel.
I am going to refrain from commenting today and comment on your next meeting, February 5th.
So, Mr. Bechtel, thanks for mentioning that. There may not be comments on the at the February 5th, and let me explain something I should have done a better job of in the beginning. My plan and, well, our plan, and the plan is going according, the timing is working out as I had hoped, would be to conclude the public hearings today. And
then I'll proceed. I'll proceed.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
I just want to point out two items. I think you need to be a little bit more, I would say less cavalier about the size of the building and measuring it. From October 12th, 2018 until April 11th, 2019, the architect, the building inspector, members of the planning commission all thought the property, the sketch that they were looking at was 25,000 square foot, and the theater at that time was actually 34,582 square feet. So it was a big error in calculating the original plan. So I think you need to take a little bit more time and look at the current plan to make sure it is in fact what it says it is. Also, I just want to point out the issue of offices. Wesley Paulson and several other members of his board and staff came to my home when I lived at 98 Sussex Street on January 26, 2019. And at that time, he expressed to me rather passionately how important it was to have both the administrative and artistic offices at the same site. And so it is incredulous to me that he is telling me now that there will be no offices. And those are my comments, and I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bechtel. So we reached the end of the list, and now we want to look at the people who we passed over the first time, and I want to make sure I get this right. So I'm looking at my notes. So we will go to Mr. Perry, then Mr. Schulman, and then we'll return to Julie Davis. Mr. Perry, are you ready to go now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question. How much time do I have?
I don't think I saw a request for extra time, but you may have 5 minutes.
I thought I made that request before, but thank you.
Well, I could have forgotten. I may not have seen it.
That's okay. Thank you very much.
The 5 minutes is fine.
First of all, in as much as Mr. Schulman has assumed that my speaking at this hearing today will be on behalf of the applicants, I request that I be able to reserve 2 minutes of that 5-minute time to speak after Mr. Schulman does.
I can grant that request.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you and the members of the Planning Commission for conducting a very orderly meeting today. I think that was very important, and I'm very impressed with how you've handled this. Contrary to Mr. Schulman's assumption, I am very much concerned about the integrity of the Planning Commission above anything else. And if there's any decision that should be vacated in this whole process, it is the decision of the Board of Commissioners to remand this matter to the Planning Commission in the first place. I believe they considered matters outside the record of the Planning Commission public hearing on August 14th, 2020. And I believe that they made their decision based upon erroneous facts. Be that as it may, we are where we are. And it's unfortunate that this unnecessary delay in processing these applications has taken place. First of all, with respect to gross floor area. I do not believe that it is appropriate for the Planning Commission at this point in time to call into question the opinion of the building inspector, Don Molina, which he rendered at the time that the Planning Commission held its hearing in August of 2020. If there is an issue with respect to the gross floor area or FAR, it seems to me as though that is a more appropriate consideration for the Board of Adjustment. The building inspector's decision should not be called into question at this point in time. I am also concerned about the motivations for what is happening. I have for a long time been concerned that the intent of the appellants has been to delay. And when I look at the history of their participation in the consideration of this matter, going back at least to the USDA hearing, it's evident to me that the whole purpose is to delay this to the point where it becomes a non-event and ClearSpace is faced with no option but to leave the city, which is a terrible outcome for the city. I base a lot of my conclusions on that, given the fact that many of the appellants engaged in a performance at the USDA hearing, which set the tone for how they would approach this matter. And it reminds me a little bit of La Mort de Pompée, which is a 17th century tragedy in which the heroine in that play professed how noble and generous her enemy was, and then went on and continued to seek his death. And I've heard a lot of that throughout this process. And I think everyone needs to be honest and frank about just what their intentions are. I also think it's pretty outrageous that Mr. Everbach is not present today, since he is at the center of an issue that places the Planning Commission once again in a position of having its integrity questioned. And Mr. Sensitive said that it was due to his inability to pinpoint a time, but Mr. Swift has very clearly indicated that it was a conscious decision not to participate. And so with that, I will close my statements at this time and reserve the balance for after Mr. Schulman's comments.
Okay, Mr. Perry, thank you very much. That brings us to Mr. Schulman.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Thank you very much. First of all, to address Mr. Perry's point and a point that was made earlier, it is absolutely incorrect that it is not the role of the Planning Commission to judge what the building inspector decided about code compliance. Mr. Perry was on the Planning Commission for 3 years. A number of us involved in this have been on the Planning Commission for 10 years or longer. I was involved in drafting the site plan ordinance. I can tell you specifically that this was discussed when the drafting of the ordinance occurred. And that's why it says that the building inspector is to give the plan to all the departments in the city and get their comments. And then the building inspector passes the report, his views along to the Planning Commission as, quote, preliminary approval. And then in section 23630E, it says that the Planning Commission has to determine whether the site plan is in compliance with the zoning code, chapter 270, the CDP, etc. It would be a complete error for you to do what Mr. Perry suggests. That is not the way the code was written. That's what the Planning Commission did the first time around. Before you even had a hearing, you said it's code compliant, it's code compliant. That's what I hear people saying here. It's code compliant, it's code compliant. You cannot make that decision, although some of you apparently have made it, until after you hear the testimony, because that's the way the ordinance is written. Secondly, this is not about whether one supports or opposes clear space. It's about whether this building of this size on this site with this design should be built as proposed. There are a lot of parameters here that can be changed, that this building could go ahead on this site. Unfortunately, ClearSpace has been willing to do almost none of them of any meaning. And now I want to have most of my remarks on parking. I'll try to finish in the time. If not, like Ms. Davis, I'll just have to come back later to it. But Mr. Keogh had some interesting ideas about parking. Maybe additional spaces on Rehoboth Avenue. Maybe nighttime parking neighborhood permits for the neighborhood. And there were other parking suggestions. After months and months and months and months of this case, nobody apparently with the burden of proof on this matter, namely ClearSpace, and the Planning Commission itself hasn't followed up on that. It's not the duty of the opponents to follow up on all of those things. So there may be a parking solution. But this gets back to, is there a parking problem? And what is a Planning Commission required to do? And let me say that in that respect, there's been very little said about educational related services, except what Ms. Mason started off with. The fact of the matter is, and there's a lot of evidence in the record about this, so I'm not going to go into the details. Each year, ClearSpace offers hundreds of classes to hundreds of students. They charge tuition. You've all seen it on the website, information that's been submitted. There's no, these are educational related services, because what does the code say about educational related services? The code specifically says that educational related services, and I'm going to quote the code now. The code says that, well, I lost it, that educational related services, education related services are services referenced in two sections. Section 270-35D13, which is the parking section, and 270-15-1. Okay, so if you look at 270-35, excuse me, I want to.
30 seconds, guys.
Well, I'm not going to finish. I'll just come back to this education-related issue later. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Shulman, if you would stay on and finish this section, I think it would be helpful for moving forward. So continue with the education session, please.
Okay, I just pulled it off my screen. I'm going to put it back on my screen. I apologize.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay, so section 270-35 of the code talks about the requirement as it relates to education-related services. Then if you go to, excuse me, 270-15-1 of the code, so I'm going to pull up now. Sorry, I don't have a multi-screen here. 270-15-1 is the educational district, okay? So we know that this is not the educational district, okay? This is a commercial district. But the code does still give a statement about what is educational related services in 270-15-1. 15-1. And it says educational related services, including, not limited to, but including organized schools offering instruction in the arts, crafts, dance, music, sports, business, or vocational subjects to groups or classes and undertaken as a commercial venture outside the normal progression of formal education, libraries, and tutoring, etc. Okay, there's no doubt that's what's going on here is hundreds of dance, music, other classes for a commercial venture outside of what is going on at the theater, namely the performances. Now, one could raise the question, is that even allowed in a C district, a C1 district? Because this is tied to the ER district. But one can also take the position that it might be an accessory use in a commercial district. So if something is properly in a commercial district, it might be appropriate to offer educational related services as an accessory use of that structure in that district. And the example I'd like to give you, Mr. Chair, is there can be a dwelling unit in a commercial building. A dwelling unit is a very different type of use. It might be for the manager of the property, whatever. But the code is very clear that even though a commercial structure may not have any requirement at all for parking, if there's a dwelling unit, there are parking requirements. Okay, so this is the analogy that you have here. Whether or not the theater itself and the performances in it require parking, and many of us believe for reasons in the record that there has not been an unmerger, that the merger that took place years ago is still in effect, that it's more than 15,000 square feet, et cetera. But putting all that aside, you have a building being constructed in the commercial area that is offering educational related services. And just like if that building had a dwelling unit in it and would have to have parking, when you offer educational related services, at least if it's not de minimis, at least if it's not, they have a class once or twice a week. But you go there in the summer, May, June, July, August, September, October, it's indistinguishable from a lot of schools that offer services. And so this gets to the point you have to look at the parking requirements in 270-35. And to this, you have no discretion. You have no discretion. If there are educational related services offered, just like if there was a dwelling unit involved, there's a certain number of parking space requirements on site. And if nobody likes that, the answer is to go to the city and get the code changed. And if you think that's strange, it's not strange at all, because your initial speaker, Ms. Lovett, was involved in a subdivision at Oak Grove. And the Planning Commission dealt with Oak Grove. And after several months of that proceeding, we discovered, guess what? Several of the lots in Oak Grove were fronting on a street that was, I think, 25 feet wide. I forget the specific numbers, and the code actually said you had a front on a street 40 feet wide. So everything we had done for several months was basically down the tubes, because that's what the code said. So what did the Planning Commission do? We didn't just drop dead. The applicant just didn't drop dead. We said, you know what? Let's figure out something and go to the mayor and commissioners and change the zoning code. And that's what happened. We didn't ignore the zoning code. We worked together to change it. And so all I am asking you to do here, and I think a lot of people are asking you to do here, uphold what the zoning code says. If you decide that these are not educational related services, anybody in the commercial district will be able to have as many classes as they want, as many days a week as they want, with as hundreds of students and teachers as they want. And they'll say, well, we have no parking requirement, because we're really a restaurant, or we're a performing arts center, or we're this, or we're that. I want to leave you lastly with something that the mayor and commissioner said when they adopted the education code and when they also addressed educational related services and said that even for schools, educational related services require a special exemption be granted. And here's why. Here's what they said about educational related services, okay? The Board of Adjustment would have a hearing whether the location of the proposed use is appropriate, the availability of adequate parking to accommodate the proposed use, the effect the proposed use will have on vehicular and pedestrian traffic, and the effect the proposed use will have on the surrounding property, persons, and neighborhood values. In granting a conditional use, the board can attach such conditions as is necessary. And then it says, following tentative conditional approval, a site plan for proposed use must be prepared meeting the conditions placed on the use and requirement of this chapter prior to final approval by the city. So that's the procedure the city set out. Assuming these classes are even allowed as an accessory use, because of concern about parking and the number of students and cars, et cetera, on surrounding area, there's supposed to be a hearing on how parking affects all of this. And then after the parking issue has been, after it's been determined whether that whole use is compatible with the neighborhood, then you have to prepare a site plan. This whole thing is being done backwards. And it's nobody's particular fault because it's not an easy issue. So I leave you, please enforce the code. It's not discretionary on you. You have to. Just like Oak Grove could not have built on a 25-foot wide street, you can't have educational related services without having the required off-street parking. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schulman. We've closed that topic. Now we would like to go back to Ms. Davis.
Am I unmuted?
You are good. Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you very much. I want to return to what I said at the beginning of my testimony earlier today, and to remind everyone that the site plan review code includes 21 factors that the commission is mandated to consider. Consideration isn't discretionary. You can't just ignore it because it's inconvenient. And the applicant has the burden of proof with respect to each and every one of those factors. And if the applicant does not provide substantial evidence on those factors, the commission simply doesn't have a record on which to base approval. Now, as to architectural compatibility, 3 of those 21 factors require the commission to consider whether the architecture of the project is compatible with the existing scale, character, and streetscape of nearby properties, as well as its impact on the city and the neighborhood as a whole. My testimony on architectural compatibility will be brief because, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. My submission includes an appendix with renderings of the theater project the ClearSpace has filed, but it also includes numerous photos from the city's architectural design manual showing the typical scale, massing, and design features of commercial buildings throughout the city's downtown business district. And it should be noted that the ClearSpace complex is currently designed and located, as was mentioned earlier, simply could not be approved under the Sussex County zoning code. But even a quick review of the exterior design, arrangement, placement, and materials of the ClearSpace complex shows that it's just bulky. It's the ultra-modern design of the complex. It's totally out of scale, out of character, out of harmony with the idiosyncratic human-scale, pedestrian-friendly architecture that creates the city's desirable and desired small-town charm. And the city's small-town charm is what the Rehoboth community and its visitors value above all else. If you remember The commission engaged consultants in connection with the 2020 CDP to conduct surveys during the summer of 2019. Over 1,100 members of the Rehoboth residential community, visitors to the city, and businesses responded. When asked about the importance of maintaining the small town atmosphere of the city, over 93% of the 680 community respondents said it should be an extremely or very important goal of city planning officials. On the other hand, when asked to rate how important improvements to the city arts and entertainment facilities are with respect to the city's quality of life, fewer than 50% of those respondents indicated that more art and cultural activities were either extremely or very important. And not one of those 680 community respondents even mentioned clear space. When asked what additional activities and facilities they would like to see more of in the city, only 3 of those respondents identified cultural or performing arts, and again, nobody mentioned clear space. Of the 369 respondents to the visitors survey, only 5 said they wanted the city government to provide more arts and entertainment opportunities. Again, no one mentioned clear space. When asked what attracted them as visitors to the city, only 5 respondents even mentioned cultural activities, and only 2 mentioned clear space. And when asked what the city could do to attract more frequent visitors to the city, only 4 pointed to more cultural or arts events. And again, clear space was not mentioned. The 60 responses to the business survey evidenced a similar lack of interest in the clear space project. Only 2 of the business respondents mentioned clear space, and those comments were both negative. One said the clear space doesn't belong on the avenue by the circle, and another commented, quote, no to clear space by the circle or in town. It needs a place in the surrounding area that can support parking. They could even do a dinner theater. Yet clear space would have the commission believe that its theater project responds to a deep-seated demand from throughout the Rehoboth residential, visitor, and business communities. This is based on an informal petition circulated by some of its supporters and board members. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is not a project that it would be, as I guess it was Mr. Perry said, it would be a tragedy if clear space left town. I'm not looking for clear space to leave town. I'm looking for clear space to find a site, find a place, whether it's in town or perhaps out of town, where it has enough space to provide the parking that is required, to rescale the building to make it look more like what Rehoboth has traditionally looked at, the small town charm, to avoid the traffic implications down Rehoboth Avenue and the traffic circle. This project doesn't belong where it is, and it shouldn't look like what they are planning. And I thank you for hearing me on this subject. And just one more thing, I am not an appellant. This is the first time I've ever testified or written a letter on this subject, but I am an attorney and I've been involved in Montgomery County, Maryland planning and zoning issues for years. And when I finally paid attention to this, I was simply appalled at the lack of adherence to what the spirit, if not the letter, of the Rehoboth Beach zoning code and the site plan review code. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Mr. Perry, that will bring us back to you.
With respect to Ms. Davis's last point, I respectfully disagree with her assessment of a lack of compliance with the code. And I will again state that I believe that the process and the procedures that were utilized by the Planning Commission in connection with the August 14th, 2020 public hearing were indeed compliant with all provisions of the code and the policies and procedures of the Planning Commission. Mr. Schulman suggested that it was the responsibility of the Planning Commission to ensure that a site plan was code compliant. He's right about that. However, I'd like to know how many members of the Planning Commission, either as of August 14th, 2020, or as of today, are in a position individually to determine whether or not a site plan submitted for review by the Planning Commission is code compliant if they cannot rely upon the certification of code compliancy by the building inspector. The provision of the code that Mr. Scholin referred to says that it is the Building and Licensing Department that shall review the site plan for compliance with zoning requirements and then initiate review by all affected city departments and agencies. And that review is to be completed. And at that point in time, their report indicating the department's preliminary approval of the site plan is submitted to the Planning Commission. It is clear from the record of the proceedings of the Planning Commission that it questioned Mr. Molina as the building inspector as to the code compliant nature of the site plan that was submitted. And the Planning Commission did indeed determine, based upon the certification of the building inspector and its inquiry of the building inspector's determination, that the site plan was code compliant. I hope that this Planning Commission has the moral fortitude to uphold the previous decision of the Planning Commission to approve the applications that were submitted. I don't think, as Mr. Lauder suggested, that the Planning Commission wasted time and city resources and engaged in divisive politics. And I think it is exactly the reason why I feel that the Board of Commissioners did a great disservice to this city by remanding this matter to the Planning Commission in the first place. And shame on them for calling into question the integrity of the Planning Commission. And whether or not anyone wants to admit it, when you continually say that you love clear space, that you want to see them remain in the city, and you say, but they should find some other place, no one has come up with a solution to the place other than to say, move outside. And I think that's wrong. We do have a small community. We don't have a lot of building spaces that can accommodate a new cultural center in this city. And if the Planning Commission does not uphold the previous decision, and I see no reason based on what has been presented today that there should be any question as to whether or not that decision was proper. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Mr. Scholin, you've had about 15 minutes already. Is there another topic you want to address, or are you ending with the educational part?
Can you hear me?
We can.
If I may have 90 seconds to respond to what Mr. Perry did, and you can literally cut me off after 90 seconds.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Perry, I find it interesting. He was the chair of the commission. That he's now continuing to insist its integrity was challenged. It did nothing wrong. He's basically saying he didn't make a mistake before, okay? Secondly, his about who on the Planning Commission is qualified to decide whether the building inspector made the right recommendation. That's what the code challenges you to do, requires you to do. He read the language and I did. It's a preliminary approval by the building inspector. And the first time around, and based on some of the comments here, some members before this hearing has said it's code compliant. And that is not the way the process goes. And he should know that. Thirdly, I'll give you a real a reality check. In the 15 years I was on the Planning Commission, probably 20% of the time, the building inspector came to us on a matter and found that a matter was code compliant. And then 100% of the time. But in 20% of the time, the Planning Commission determined to the contrary. There's no indication Mr. Molina even looked at educational related services or even looked at this merger issue. Nothing. We've asked for documents. We haven't gotten any. So you're being asked to defer to something that wasn't even reviewed against the standards in the code, and the Planning Commission has done this before. You don't just throw Mr. Molina's opinion out the window and say it doesn't matter, but you must make your own determination. And in this case, it is not code compliant for reasons he himself never even looked at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schulman. If we could have just a moment. Okay, everyone, thank you for your patience. I'm going to close the public comment section of these hearings at this time. Our plan is to convene again next week at the same time for Planning Commission deliberation and decision, if we can get that far in that amount of time. And I believe, based on this record, we will be able to do that. If it doesn't work, we will notice and schedule a third meeting. And since
leaving the written comment period.
Oh, I'm sorry, I neglected to say one thing. So the period for written comments is open now and will stay open through Tuesday, close of business. So additional written comments can be submitted through February 2nd, p.m. 4:30 p.m. Thank you so much. At this point in time, I'm sort of polling the Planning Commission to see how you're holding out in the strength. But if it would benefit everybody from having a few minutes discussion about what to be prepared for and how we'll conduct next Friday's meeting, I think it would be beneficial if you can all indulge me in that. Anybody want to say anything about that? Mr. Covington?
Jeff, yeah, before we do that, I want to piggyback on what you said about submitting public comments before next Tuesday. I think a lot of these comments were read, and there are a lot of really fantastic points were made. And for me, trying to write them down was very difficult. So I would encourage those who have prepared remarks to submit them to us and put them in the record so we can read them next week and digest them and consider them.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Covington, because you reminded me of something I said at the beginning, and I had forgotten about this. I did ask ClearSpace to take careful notes, and I did promise that if time permits, I would offer them time to respond to anything they wanted to today, and or have the option of the written comments by Tuesday. So I would actually like to ask ClearSpace at this time whether they want to respond verbally to anything today, and then I will have spoken correctly. So, Mr. Paulson?
Yes, Laura Mason and I have been making a list, and I'd like to lead off with something, let Laura address a few things, and then come back to see what the two of us might have missed. The first issue I would like to address is Mr. Schulman's exaggeration of hundreds of classes. ClearSpace currently offers 12 classes a year. There are 3 in the spring, 3 in the fall, and 5 in the summer. That's 11. Sorry for my math. That represents only 7% of our revenue. So I think I'd like to set the record straight on that. In terms of our major focus is theatrical production and not education. With that in mind, I also remind Mr. Schulman and the appellants regarding Laura Mason's earlier citation of the number of businesses who are commercial who offer classes. Those included several yoga institutes or whatever business you want to call them, as well as the fitness center over at First Street Station, the library, and the senior center. So we are not alone in this. And as with, I'll stop at that. I will say that Baymart is not for sale, period. Regarding fire safety, the state fire marshal located in Georgetown has jurisdiction over review of our site plans. The fire marshal did visit with the fire chief in Rehoboth, did visit with us, and was emphatic about the 84-inch elevators, which my architect says are compliant, that the size of our elevators are. And if they're not, we will fix that. Much like the second look at wherever we found 350 square feet of incompatible fire space will be reviewed. We'll double check the elevators. I'm going to defer to Laura now and let her address a few items. Dr. Mason.
Thank you. I do want to correct one comment that was made by Ms. Good, questioning my knowledge of secondary educational facilities. I'm very familiar with them, as I was a high school teacher for many years. And also, probably the only person who can say they have taught in a school on Rehoboth Avenue. I've taught numerous graduate level courses when Wilmington University was on the avenue. So I'm very familiar with what a true school looks like in downtown Rehoboth. I would like to say that ClearSpace does not claim to be a school, never have we. And as Wesley stated, I'm not sure how you define or differentiate our classes from the classes that are offered by all the different yoga studios, the gyms. We do dance, we do stretching, we do some talking, some acting. Very similar to yoga where you do your stretching. As far as the Senior Citizen Center goes, my reference to them, their parking is not dedicated. They have a flat lot next to their center, but as we all know, that is metered by the city. So they do not have dedicated spaces on site. I wanted to address the comment about outdated surveys. Surveys are very hard right now as our patrons are limited to 30%. So doing a survey today is not going to get us a lot of information. So we apologize that those are out of date, but that's what we have to work with at this time. As far as parking and the traffic circle, we have a lot of information on, we're focusing on the traffic circle. We have to remember that is not the only way to enter the city. As a couple people have said, somebody pointed out that most of the board members are not residents of the city. I live one street outside of the city on the south side. I do not use the traffic circle at all. I actually avoid it. I come in and out of town through 2nd Street. So while we focus all these trips of cars coming to and from the theater, they will not all be coming from the circle. Some of us will be coming from the south. Some of us will be coming in through State Street. There are multiple avenues to get into the city. And I think we need to remember that when looking, we can't quantify the trips will always be at the circle. And for example, people coming in through 2nd Street may not be parking near the theater. They may park further southwest as to use restaurants. And I think that was all I had.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mason. I want to come back to a couple of comments that Mr. Kehoe made. ClearSpace is not advocating changing the parking arrangements in the last block of Rehoboth Avenue at the approach to the circle. Regarding the zone parking, somebody made the comment that we were responsible for advocating for that type of thing in order to address that issue, that being extended zone parking on the streets immediately to our north. I learned from experience here when the time came for us to request an additional handicap space, the additional space and accommodation had to be requested by the property owner. So while we were a tenant in this building, I had to get Mr. Langford to write the letter on our behalf to make a change in parking. At one time, I asked about changing the length of the meters to 4 hours when they were still coin operated. I was advised again by the city that I would need to get the property owners to agree to make that request to the city commissioners. So regarding zone parking, I have been promoting it as an option, but it would need to be the residents on the affected streets who initiate the request with the city. ClearSpace would be happy to convene, provide any resources in terms of copying, I don't know what, Zoom meeting. I have a Zoom account if we'd like to have a Zoom meeting to work on this together. But that is the status on parking that Mr. Kehoe brought up. Regarding sound, I shared the sound report from the appellant's consultant and our sound report with our sound designer at Mid-South Audio. And the credentials for Mid-South include sound at here, as well as Freeman Stage and a variety of other venues. They're well versed in what they do. And Mr. Short took a look at the reports and said, yes, we probably should go with the lower residential threshold. But his comment was, in reality, until we have the building finished and we plug in the soundboard and the speakers and the microphones and start testing, we won't know the limits of the sound system. And at that time, he can do the, I forgot the 95 decibel test that somebody mentioned. And we'd be happy to share the results, announce that we're making the test so that property owners who are in town at the time can stand on their back porches and witness, or whatever steps need to be done. Again, I conclude my comments, unless Laura's come up with anything, with my opening remark, that some of these issues, which are very serious and which we take seriously, cannot be addressed at this time because we're not at that point in the development of the project. And when the time comes, as I mentioned with sound, as we talked about with lights, as we talked about with noise, I believe Mr. Swift made some comments about extra padding and things on the fences. Well, if that becomes necessary, we will consider it. We're not dismissing it out of hand. We are not trying to be obstinate or any other adjective you wish. We're just trying to be practical and focus on the next phase of this building, which is bidding, planning, and construction, knowing that we have these things before us. Again, I remind you of my story to be succinct about the fence at 419. The fence is on our list. We'll deal with the fence at the time the contractor's there and we know what we'll do with it. And my example is, if the fence can't be taken down and put back in place as it is now stands, it is our agreement that we will go ahead and replace the fence in kind. But the owner also recognizes that now is not the time for us to make that commitment because we don't know if it's even necessary. I guess I look at this and I don't know if this is appropriate, but it's kind of on my mind. We've got a snow forecast for the weekend or next week, and we're at how many inches now? And people are upset. And the next thing you know, it goes from 3 inches to 1 inch to wintry mix to rain to no storm. And it's my hope that the construction of this theater will be our equivalent of the anticipated snowstorm that turns out not to be a bother at all. And whatever we can do to make that happen, we will do. And remember that with all of the issues that have been raised, especially sound and parking, we want to create a positive atmosphere for our patrons, which is the purpose of this project. Our patrons, as the quality of our show improves, our patrons, our cast, our staff have all grown tired of the facility we're in, and we want to enhance the arts in Rehoboth Beach by making this contribution to the city. So I'm done. I thank you for your time. Dr. Mason, did you have anything else to add?
I'm going to go back. I was reviewing the list that we've been sending back and forth, and I'm going to touch on a few of the items that we may have overlooked.
Thank you.
One was the refuse collection. And Wesley, you'll probably have to elaborate on it being inside. The theater will be generating food refuse, so I see no reason why that couldn't be stored inside, backstage, out of sight. I wouldn't think that would be an issue with any type of contamination.
Right. There's no direct food service in the theater other than what we do now, which is, beverages and snacks at intermission.
Correct.
And so that would be stored inside the door backstage. And that was reviewed by the building inspector and signed off on.
Yes. The simultaneous shows, I'm not sure what wording we can use to say we don't plan, we won't. Simultaneous shows don't behoove us. We are drawing on an audience, and that would be splitting our audience in two. So I'm not sure what else we can say on that other than that doesn't buy us anything by having simultaneous shows in the two different buildings.
I would comment on that statistically. Mr. Christopher Peterson is not an annual event here, his Icon show. In fact, this has been 4 years since he's been here. The show doesn't run much more than an hour if it starts at 10. Delaware Comedy Theater we do as part of an outreach and partnership. And I can tell you that their audience, they start at 10 and their audience is about 30 people. And I'd say half and half are people who have stayed over from the show and maybe a few people who come in. And we're done well before midnight with both of those.
Okay, Mr. Paulson and Dr. Mason. So I think the intent of what I wanted to do to give you responsibility to comment is done, and of course, public comment period is over. So you are welcome to submit more things in writing for Tuesday, and I thank you for your participation. So,
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and we apologize for running over time.
Oh, no, it's fine. Thank you. We're doing very well with time. So I guess going back to the Planning Commission. So I know everybody has extensive notes. Everyone's been taking a lot of notes today. We have the testimony. We will open up at 1 o'clock next Friday. We will work through the 21 factors. Obviously, some may take longer than the other. I would like to leave it open, so we will have our deliberation, and I would like to leave it open that, should we work through the factors and reach agreement or general consensus or however it is we're going to do it, that we would possibly make a decision next Friday, time permitting. That'll be from the 1 to 4:30 period of time. So you have time to review what's been done today. You have time to review the record, time to think about it. And with that, does anybody have a question or comment on the hearing today and what we'll do next Friday? Mr. Kaufman.
Just one thing. I was asked a question early on about the record open. I want to be clear of what I was actually saying. often in a hearing, even if a decision is made, sometimes the record had been left open for maybe 2 weeks to allow either an applicant or a consultant to put into the record something that was referred to but was not in the record. So in our case, since we have agreed to allow comments to come into until next Tuesday, I think that addresses it. So I just wanted to be clear about that.
Wonderful. Thanks for pointing that out. Ms. Lucier, you need to unmute.
You have to
Joyce,
unmute.
you need.
Do you, if we have questions or comments on anything, like from Mr. Paulson or anything, do you want us to send those to you with copies to Mike like we did, or are we finished asking questions?
So
you wanted to coordinate things.
Yeah. So two things there. One, the information gathering, the information listening to session, the process is over. We believe that we have everything we need. Although when we deliberate, we may discover that we need something. So I think it's hard to tell. If you discover an issue that needs clarification, I know for myself, I could possibly think of something and we may already have it in the record. So for now, I would ask you to send the questions to the vice chair and myself. Let us put our heads together and find out whether we need information or whether we just need to locate information that's already in the record. I think that would be a good first triage step. Is everybody good with that? Great, okay. How about any other questions? Would anyone like to adjourn? I'm making a motion. Mr. Bryan raised his hand. Did I hear a second? Okay, Mr. Kaufman, second. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. This was a great hearing.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.